Chapter 753 The Situation. After killing the rank 4 Drakeblood, Michael did not waste time before putting it in his damaged coffin of the Forgotten. Upon seeing this action, some of the other races wanted to speak out. It couldn't be helped, as the bodies of any rank 4 creature were a treasure. Their bodies could be used to make weapons, act as energy sources for weapons, and help in assisting the cultivation of other rank 4 and rank 3 below them significantly. Michael, taking such treasure for himself, instinctively made them want to act before they recovered themselves. Putting aside the fact that just now they had all turned to run away and only he went forward, if all of them were being honest with themselves, if not for the youth and his undead, particularly his undead, most of them would be dead without question. To also assist in their survival, the youth had also lost a lot of his powerful undead. How he got so many in the first place didn't matter, since as creatures who had already started to touch laws, they couldn't be easy to get. Losing so many of them in such a short amount of time was an immense loss. Exchanging all this for a rank 4 supernatural corpse, well, 2 rank 4 supernatural corpses felt a bit okay. The moment after Michael placed the body of the rank 4 Drakeblood in the space within the damaged coffin of the Forgotten and returning it together with his spear into his soul space, Michael's bloody gigantic body deflated into his normal size as he fell to his knees. Before a lot of the other races could react, Spartan, Fade, and a few other of Michael's undead had already appeared by his side. Michael didn't pay attention to any of this, or rather he couldn't pay attention because thanks to losing Beginning's nature effect on him thanks to his law, the damage that Michael should have felt came back to him at once, causing him to immediately faint. Fortunately, thanks to Beginning's law, the damage to his soul brought from losing many of his undead and so many in a short time had been somewhat mended, and Michael was out of the dangerous phase. But whether it was mended or not, it did not take away from the fact that since his first undead, this was the greatest loss Michael had ever encountered in his journey. Unfortunately, he wasn't even able to stay awake to fully process it, or perhaps it was even better this way. Seeing Michael collapse, the other races wanted to get close, but the moment they showed that intention, the undead surrounding Michael got defensive. Perhaps if it wasn't for the intelligence they possessed allowing them to have basic reasoning, they would have attacked everyone the moment they showed the intention to get close. Seeing the reaction of the undead, none of the races dared to move closer and just watched the situation from afar. The leaders of the 3 races came together again for a discussion. Among the 3, the only person that was relatively complete was the elf. The Karveth leader, who initially had 4 arms, now had just 1 remaining. The Varelian, the small-winged humanoid race's leader, had lost her wings. If it wasn't that rank 3 didn't need wings to fly, she wouldn't have been even able to converse with their fellow race leaders. The moment the leaders gathered, the contrast between them became almost absurd. The elf stood with his usual indifferent expression, not even bothering to hide his gaze as it swept over the Karveth. "You're a mess," he said flatly. The Karveth leader clicked his tongue, rolling his remaining shoulder. The stump where his other arms should have been had already been sealed by crude emergency methods, but sealing was not healing. Losing a limb can cripple a supernatural, sometimes permanently, but this was the supernatural world. As long as one was willing to pay the price, limbs could be restored and so on. To some certain extent, if one was strong enough, dying didn't exactly mean death, so what could losing a limb be? The only problem was that the stronger you were, the harder it became. A low-ranked warrior could regrow an arm through simple regeneration techniques or cheap healing resources. A rank 3, especially one who had already touched laws, was different. Their bodies were no longer just flesh. They were structures shaped by authority and truth. Restoring a limb for someone like the Karveth leader was not simply healing a wound. It was reconstructing a portion of his existence. And he was not weak by any means. The Karveth leader grinned anyway, stubborn pride flickering in his eyes. "Scars are the pride of my race," he declared. "I do not mind them." The elf looked at him. The Varelian looked at him too. Neither of them changed expression. The Karveth leader's grin stiffened, then cracked. He coughed once, cleared his throat, and his eyes darted away. The Karveth leader scratched the side of his face with his remaining hand, suddenly finding the air very interesting. "My true plan is to return to my realm and beg my elders to take pity." On a poor youth, he admitted. As long as I can forget my face for 1 year and I owe some favors, I will be brand new. He lifted his stump slightly, then dropped it again, grimacing. The elf's gaze lingered on the Karveth's sealed stumps for another breath, then drifted to the Varelian. She floated a little apart from the others. Where her wings should have been, there was only smooth, healed tissue and faint lines of torn channels, like scars carved directly into her body. And you? The Varelian's eyes did not flicker. They will grow back, she said. The Karveth leader's remaining brow rose. That easy. In time, she replied. If I heal naturally, 10 years. Chapter 754, An Ordinary Genius. Outwardly, her condition looked less severe than the Karveth's. She still had her limbs. She still had her core intact. She still hovered without difficulty, because rank 3 did not need wings to fly. But that was a surface reading. What she did not say, and what she did not intend to say, was that losing her wings had injured more than flesh. It had injured her vitality. Not in a way that would immediately kill her, but vitality was not just lifespan. This injury had also damaged her potential to some extent. And even the process of regaining her wings would consume more vitality. Whether she used resources or not, some portion of that vitality would be spent. The only difference was that using resources would make the cost smaller, controlled, and less significant to worry about. She did not need the elf to know that. She did not need the Karveth to know it either. The elf representative studied the two, then spoke in the same flat, indifferent tone she used for everything. If you are willing to pay with precious resources, she said, my race can treat it. The Karveth leader blinked. Your race? The Varelian's eyes narrowed slightly in surprise. In the vast universe, elves were not only known for their beauty, their affinity to nature, or the pride that made them carry themselves as if they stood on the same pedestal as dragons and phoenixes. Their healing arts were also among the best. Even without treatment having begun, both races knew that what the elven race could provide was far superior to what their own races could offer. Healing was also how a race as proud as the elves avoided isolation and maintained countless connections. What shocked the two was not the offer itself, but the fact that an elf had suggested it at all. Based on her tone, it even sounded like they would be receiving a favorable deal. One should not judge this by the way the elf was currently speaking to them. After spending years together on the 3rd floor, even without close interaction, proximity alone had forced familiarity. The fact that she still did not truly place them in her eyes had not changed. The Karveth leader swallowed. You can do that? The elf did not smile. If you can pay. The Karveth leader and the Varelian exchanged a glance. What had changed? Was it surviving 2 rank 4 existences? Or had the elf simply decided that, for reasons they could not grasp, today they were worth addressing as equals? Do not think too deeply about it, the elf representative said. She continued, voice steady. You assisted on the 15th floor. And besides, the elf added, cutting off any sense of misplaced gratitude before it could form. You will pay. This is not kindness. It is just business. The Varelian and the Karveth said nothing, though their expressions were complicated. Even with how she framed it, an elf remembering a favor was rare. An elf admitting it openly was rarer still. It was not uncommon for others to die for elves and consider it an honor. That mindset was especially common among elven royalty. As their conversation reached a natural pause, all 3 of them turned their attention downward. To the youth. He lay unconscious amid shattered earth, surrounded by undead standing guard like silent sentinels. The battlefield around him was ruined beyond recognition, but none of that drew their eyes as much as the still figure at the center of it all. The Karveth leader exhaled slowly. I hope the kid is doing well. The Varelian shook her head faintly. I doubt it. Both the Karveth and the elf glanced at her. I was not with him the entire time, the Varelian continued calmly. But I am not blind. The death of his undead affects him. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly as memories of the battle surfaced. That is common among necromancers who revive their undead using fragments of their own soul, she said. Each loss tears something. Away. The Karveth leader frowned. He lost a lot. Too many, the Varelian replied. And not weak ones. Even to her trained senses, the quality of those undead had been abnormal. Losing even one would have been a blow. Losing many in such a short period of time was devastating. His fainting was inevitable, she concluded. Whether his body collapsed or his mind did, one of them had to give. The female elf said nothing. Her gaze remained fixed on the youth, unreadable. For a brief moment, something close to thought flickered behind her. Indifferent eyes. Then it vanished. He is alive, she said at last. That is enough. For now. The elf's gaze did not leave the youth as she spoke again. If I could carry him to my realm fast enough, she said calmly. There is a chance some of the damage could be resolved. The Karveth leader's remaining eye widened slightly. A chance? He repeated. A small one, the elf replied without hesitation. Soul damage heals. Best when addressed immediately, before it settles into the foundation. Time matters. Her eyes shifted briefly to the undead surrounding Michael. But that is not possible. The undead stood in a loose circle around the unconscious youth. Step closer and die. None of the three leaders said it out loud, but they all understood it instantly. Approaching the youth meant certain death. Even wounded and diminished, those undead were still monsters. And they were loyal, fanatically so. The Karveth leader let out a slow breath. Then this will weaken him. Yes, the elf answered. There was no pause, no softening of tone. Yes, she repeated. It will affect his potential. The Varelian's fingers curled slightly at her side. The Karveth leader frowned deeply. By how much? The elf considered it for a heartbeat. Enough that he may fall. Fall? The Karveth pressed. From a holy child, the elf said, voice flat, to an ordinary genius. Silence followed. An ordinary genius. Chapter 755. Peak of rank 3. In any other place, among any other race, that title alone would be enough to inspire awe. A being destined to stand above countless others. But here, among entities who had brushed against rank 4 calamities and survived, the weight of the words was different. The Karveth leader clicked his tongue. That's a pity. The Varelian said nothing, but her gaze lingered on Michael longer than before. Even the elf felt it. A faint sense of regret stirred within her. A holy child reduced before his time was wasteful. Inefficient. Such existences were rare even among elves. But that feeling passed quickly. An ordinary genius was still valuable to most races. Just not to hers. Her expression returned to indifference. If he survives, she said, turning away, he will still be strong. Strong enough to matter, but not strong enough to be worth concern. The Karveth leader stared at the unconscious youth for a long moment, jaw tight, then clicked his tongue again. I disagree, he said. The Varelian's gaze shifted to him. The female elf did not react, but her attention sharpened slightly. The Karveth continued, his voice rough. You two are only looking at the ridiculous number of undead he lost. You forgot that even what he has left is still perverted. That single sentence was enough to jolt the other two out of their drifting conclusions. The Varelian's eyes narrowed slightly. The elf's expression remained indifferent, but her pupils contracted. They remembered Prince, who stood in the chaos like a silent executioner, feeding on enemy souls to strengthen himself with every kill. Spartan's abyss flames, black and ravenous, devouring matter and energy alike as if the world itself had no right to resist. Lucky, whose fire poison had brought down a rank 4 drakeblood given time and a single opening. The ant, a ridiculous little thing with strength that did not match its size. The female giant that could devour nearly anything. The mysterious mantis. And the two flying undead snake illusions that looked unreal, except for the moments when they were very much real. And then there was Michael himself. They did not know what his law truly was. They only knew what it had shown. A rank 2 at the peak, matching rank 3 elites who had already touched laws. In some moments even pressuring them. In others, doing things that should not have been possible for someone at his stage. That was not luck. That was not a one-time miracle. That was a foundation. The Varelian exhaled softly. Even weakened, she admitted. He is still abnormal. The Karveth leader snorted. Exactly. He nodded toward the youth, then toward the undead standing guard. He's only rank 2, the Karveth said. Do you understand that? Only rank 2. This is not his limit. The female elf's gaze finally moved from Michael to the line of undead. Again, she evaluated them. Then she spoke, her tone unchanged. If he survives, she said, and recovers to a reasonable extent, yes. She paused. He will still be strong. The Varelian's lips pressed together. And he can still grow. The Karveth grinned, his single remaining arm hanging at his side, expression fierce despite the blood and stumps. He will get stronger, he said. That's the terrifying part. For a moment, none of them spoke. A sudden roar shattered the stillness. Space itself shuddered as the sound burst outward, compressing the air into visible ripples. The ground trembled. Cracks raced across the already fractured terrain, widening as if something enormous had shifted its weight. All 3 leaders turned at once. Their gazes snapped toward the source. At the far end of the ruined battlefield, within the fading remnants of the dark domain, a colossal figure straightened. Beginning, the Titan rose to his full height, and the world seemed to shrink. Around him, 60 meters, that was how tall he stood now. His body was no longer jagged or unstable. The brutal rebirth had completed its work. Dense muscle layered over reinforced bone, his form thick and heavy. And his aura was terrifying. A crushing, oppressive presence that pressed down on everything nearby, making even rank 3 elites feel as if their cores were being gripped by an unseen hand. For a brief instant, it did not feel much weaker than the 2 rank. For existences that had just died. But only for a brief instant. The elf's eyes narrowed. He has not ascended, she said. The Varelian nodded slowly. The Karveth leader inhaled deeply, his remaining arm tightening. But look at him, they could all tell. Beginning had not crossed into rank 4 yet, but he stood at the very peak of rank 3. If Michael had been awake, he would have reached the same conclusion as them. He would not even need to study Beginning's aura or ask questions. Had already been made obvious elsewhere. Undead Titan, level 75. Just one more level. One more advancement and Beginning would ascend into the ranks of rank 4 as a new creature. Beginning tilted his massive head back and released another roar. Shorter this time and lower, vibrating with restrained power rather than frenzy. The sound rolled outward, carrying a single, unmistakable message. Do not come closer. The Karveth leader let out a slow breath, something between a laugh and a sigh. So even now, he still has this. The Varelian's voice was quiet. If the youth survives and recovers, this thing alone is enough to secure his position. The elf watched Beginning for a long moment. Then she turned away. Rank 2, she said flatly. With subordinates like this. Her tone did not change, but something beneath it had shifted. Meanwhile, in another part of hell, a youth could be seen running wildly, as if escaping from something. Yet if one looked behind him, they would find nothing chasing him at all. He was running for reasons known only to himself. If Michael were here, he would have recognized the youth. It was Brian. Chapter 756 Negative Emotions. If someone had been able to see Brian's face clearly, they would have understood instantly that something was wrong. It was a mess of emotions, layered and tangled. Fear, confusion, panic, even disbelief. Not a single trace of anything positive. But why was Brian like this? The reason was simple. Through the method of the figure clad in gray, Brian could see what the gray figure saw from afar. It was not perfect, but it was enough. And what Brian saw at first almost made him lose himself to joy. A powerful existence wrapped in gray. 2 terrifying rank 4 beings by his side. And Michael just happened to be nearby. For a brief moment, Brian's heart nearly burst with satisfaction. Finally. He was finally going to see Michael erased from this world. It was a shame he would not get to do it with his own hands. But Brian was not bothered by such details. Pride did not matter. Only the result mattered. As long as Michael was gone, everything would return to how it was supposed to be. He would be one of the brightest youths in Aurora again. He was already one, but for some reason Brian always got himself into a situation where he ended up being the stepping stone for Michael to either showcase his power or push his fame. With Michael gone, any action he took again, he would be the one people whispered about. The one the world praised. That was what he believed. That was what he wanted. That was what he had been clinging to. Brian watched with the kind of excitement that made his fingertips tremble. Then everything went wrong. So wrong that Brian's mind refused to accept it at first. The shock came like a hammer to the chest. Why did Michael have so many rank 3 undead? And why were they able to actually compete with actual rank 4 supernaturals even if suppressed? How was Michael able, or rather why did the current him have the strength to compete with a rank 3 powerhouse? How were his undead so strong? Why? Why him? Why always him? And then the vision cut as the last thing Brian saw was Michael lunge. Michael, who had not even ascended to rank 3, killing a strongman in that rank. Fear took over Brian, and without thinking, even though his location was far away, he ran as fast as he could away from the 15th floor of hell. Brian's speed carried him across the gray wastes like a streak of warped air. Then, in the middle of that frantic sprint, his foot caught on a jagged ridge hidden beneath the ash. It was not enough to hurt him at his stage, but it was enough to disrupt his rhythm. His balance snapped for a fraction of a second, and that single mistake turned his momentum, pitching his body forward. He slammed into the gray earth with a dull boom, skidding across the soil like a thrown weapon, carving a deep scar behind him. His shoulder clipped a low hill next, and the impact caved it in. Dust and dead ash erupted outward. A crater formed where his body finally stopped. For a moment, Brian lay there in the broken ground, chest rising and falling fast as the pause from everything calmed him down. If he had been an ordinary human, that crash would have shattered bones. But Brian was not ordinary if he was not being compared to Michael. Norman, that is. Brian pushed himself up with a snarl, dust falling from his hair and coat. Brian's jaw tightened as a wave of embarrassment washed over him so hard it almost made him nauseous. He had run. He had sprinted like prey out of fear. Fear of Michael. Just thinking about it made heat crawl up his neck. What was he doing? Why should he fear Michael? He had 3 different classes, and their advantage was continuous. From early to late stages. If that damaged Necromancer did not exist, he would be the most brilliant one. Brian clenched his fists and stood fully, the ground beneath his boots, cracking again as if reacting to his mood. He looked back in the direction he had come from, eyes hard, breathing slower now. In his mind, the last image remained vivid, Michael's punch. Michael, still not ascended, still at the peak of rank 2, moving like someone who did not belong in the same category as everyone else. And the punch. That single, clean strike that ended a rank 3 powerhouse. Brian's lips twitched. The fear was still there, buried under the surface like a thorn he could not remove, but now it was mixed with something else. Anger, humiliation, jealousy, envy, greed. A sharp, poisonous resentment that made his stomach twist. He had been happy for only a moment. Happy because he thought he would finally be free of Michael's shadow. Free of being compared. Free of being used as a stepping stone. Ever since the college exams and he got famous as well, there was not a post he threw out that did not have comments about Michael. In fact, some of his lost feeds were solely a gathering space for Michael fans. No matter what Brian did, somehow, someway he ended up in a situation where Michael benefited. Michael grew. Michael shone. Michael took the spotlight. Michael took what should have been Brian's. And now, even when someone else came to kill him, Michael still won. Brian's breathing steadied completely. He stepped out of the crater he had made, brushing gray dust from his sleeve, eyes cold and focused. It's fine. He only has the lead now. It does not mean it will remain so forever. With my 3 classes, as long as I do well in all 3 of my class advancement quests, we'll see who comes out on top. For this, Brian was quite confident. However, recalling Michael's Undead Legion, Brian could not help but lose a bit of that confidence again. Chapter 757 Return. Meanwhile, back on the 15th floor, the ruined battlefield had not yet settled. Ash still drifted through the air. The stench of blood, corrosion, and burnt authority lingered like a curse that refused to fade. The other races remained where they were, their attention still fixed on the unconscious youth and the towering undead guarding him. Then space trembled. A thin tear split the air as an older man emerged from the rift. The moment he did, a powerful aura rolled outward, heavy and commanding. The reaction was immediate as several rank 3 elites stiffened. Another rank 4? What was happening in hell? A New Year celebration? But that tension lasted only a heartbeat because the aura was familiar. This was a rank 4 from Michael's realm. An old man many of them had seen before. Now they remembered why he left. He had gone to subjugate the demon lord. Seeing him looking all tattered here could only mean one thing. Either he succeeded or he did not. The old man stood still for a moment, brows furrowing as his gaze swept across the battlefield. The devastation was far worse than when he had left. Entire sections of terrain had been erased. Craters layered over. Craters. Residual authority hung in the air like the echo of thunder after a storm. Dead bodies lay scattered across the field. Rank 3 corpses. Fragments of rank 4 remains. His eyes narrowed. What happened here? Then his gaze shifted. It locked onto beginning. The old man's body stiffened instantly. His aura surged, sharp and alert, snapping into a defensive posture without conscious thought. His hand moved halfway toward a technique before he stopped himself. 60 meters of undead titans stood in the distance, motionless but watchful. The pressure rolling off beginning was like a mountain. The old man's pupils contracted. When did such powerful undead appear? His gaze flicked downward. Only then did he notice the youth lying unconscious at the Titan's feet. Michael, surrounded by undead. Impossible, he muttered in disbelief, though he did not think he had left for a short amount of time. Just what in the heavens happened here while he was away? Fortunately, the old man was not alone, as the leaders of the 3 races and a certain silver-glistened Amazari elder who was blinded in. One eye floated toward him. As for the 2 Stonekin elders, unfortunately, they had died in battle. The old man immediately asked his questions as they all tried their best to answer in their own ways. After some back and forth, the old man finally had an idea of what had happened. Basically, after he left, 2 rank 4 criminals had come to hold them down, which eventually led to a fight, and what stood before the man's eyes was the aftermath of that battle. After understanding the situation a bit more, the old man calmed down. Since they had briefed him on the situation here, the races also wanted to know how it went on his end. It was exactly as they had expected. After the old man left and arrived at his destination, the rank 4 superpower from the Drakeblood realm was already fighting the Demon Lord, and though it looked like a pretty equal fight, it was not, as the Demon Lord was gradually gaining the advantage, making the conclusion of the fight uncertain at that time. However, after the old man joined, the fight became more balanced, with his side gaining more advantage. Though the old man spoke lightly of it, his current appearance told a harder tale. In any case, after dealing with the Demon Lord and dividing its parts, details which the old man did not give specifics on regarding what he and the Drakeblood took, he came back immediately. After telling his own story, the leaders of the other races fell into their own thoughts as the old man's attention returned to Michael, then to beginning before returning to Michael again. The elf caught him looking at Michael and spoke. "Your realm is fortunate," she said, "to have produced a youth like that." The old man's eyes remained on the unconscious figure, then moved to the ring of undead standing guard, then briefly to beginning's towering silhouette in the distance. He nodded. It should have been a simple, natural response. But it was not. The nod came a fraction too late, and it carried an awkward stiffness that did not match the certainty in the elf's statement. The Karveth leader noticed it. The Varelian noticed it too. Even the Amazari elder, half-blinded and bloodied, tilted her head. Slightly. They all sensed something off. Yet none of them could put a finger on it. Inside the old man's mind, the truth was simple. He did not know how to say it. He had only met this youth today, for the first time in his life. Before today, he had not even known Michael existed. Not his name, not his talent. But how could he say that here, in front of these races? It would make no sense. It would make his realm look blind. It would make him look incompetent. So he said nothing. He simply nodded again, as if the elf's words were expected. Yes, he replied, voice calm. Fortunate. The elf's gaze lingered. For the smallest moment, her eyes narrowed, but she did not pursue. She did not care enough. The Karveth leader scratched his cheek with his remaining hand, staring at the old man for another breath, then looked away. The Varelian's expression remained neutral, but her attention sharpened. Then the Amazari elder spoke, her voice hoarse. What now? The elf looked at the old man. Treatment, she said simply. He needs it immediately. The old man's brows furrowed. He did not argue. He could see the state Michael was in even without touching him. But there was just one tiny issue. All the race leaders turned to look at a certain towering undead. Well, it was quite a big issue. Chapter 758 Condition. Though Michael's health was of utmost importance, no one was going to attempt fighting a half-step rank 4 giant for him, especially not in the chaotic aftermath of such a brutal battle. For one, none of the races present were in the right state to fight. Many were gravely wounded, exhausted from the prolonged clash against 2 rank 4 threats, and their forces had already been thinned considerably. Even if they were at full strength, taking on beginning in his enhanced state would require them to be prepared to lose at least half of their numbers, if not more, given the Titan's overwhelming power and the merciless nature of his law of brutal rebirth. Even if they included the old man, a suppressed rank for superpower capable of unleashing devastating force despite his restrictions, they could only hope that the other undead, aside from beginning, would not attack. That hope was clearly unreasonable. The Undead Legion was fiercely loyal and relentless, and provoking them would turn the battlefield into an even greater slaughter. Including the old man, none of the races present saw dying in a failed attempt to save someone as something a person with a functioning brain would choose to do. Survival instincts ran deep among supernaturals who had clawed their way to rank 3 and beyond, and gambling everything on such a reckless intervention was pure folly. Meanwhile, close to Michael, Spartan knelt beside his master's body, his tattered robes hanging loosely. In his hand, he held a worm-like creature. The undead's expression remained calm and composed, betraying no emotion despite the concern he felt for his master. It was the rank 3 life worm, a precious undead known for its potent healing properties. He had seen the creature crawl out of Michael's body moments ago, its task apparently complete as far as physical injuries were concerned. It turned out that before his master lost consciousness, or perhaps sometime just before that, Michael had wisely placed the life worm inside his body to stabilize his condition and mend the severe damage caused by overexertion and backlash. However, upon further inspection with his own senses, Spartan could tell that while his master's physical condition was more or less healed thanks to the worm and Michael's resilient constitution, his soul was far from being out of danger. The loss of so many bonded undead had left deep scars on Michael's soul, fractures that no mere physical healer could quickly mend. Spartan, who was as knowledgeable as his master, if not more so in certain aspects, pondered deeply on what he could do to aid his recovery. His cold gaze then shifted toward the race leaders floating in midair, fixing specifically on the elf. To the knowledgeable Spartan, the elves were a race renowned for their healing abilities. Without hesitation, Spartan flew toward them. Aside from the old man, who was neither intimidated by a mere rank 3 undead nor unfamiliar with Spartan's presence during the battle, the other race leaders tensed up. The sudden shift in atmosphere drew the old man's full attention, but he was more focused on what the undead had to say, his curiosity piqued by the unexpected approach. This was not his first time seeing Spartan during the battle. He already knew that this undead was particularly intelligent, far beyond typical mindless thralls. At first glance, Spartan looked no different from a human, with refined features and an almost ethereal poise. Without closer inspection, and thanks to his particularly enchanting appearance that carried an unnatural allure, one might have mistaken him for a member of some rare undead race or higher variant. Spartan was indeed undead, but in the universe, pure undead races capable of reproduction were rare, limited to beings such as vampires who maintained bloodlines and societies of their own. Most undead like Spartan were created and bound to their creators, making them fundamentally different from races like vampires, who did not need to be raised from the dead. Spartan stopped several steps away from the gathered leaders. "Can you heal my master?" Spartan asked, his words directed generally, though his focus was clearly on the elf. The elf fixed her gaze on him, her eyes clear and sharp. She showed no reaction to his undead nature, nor any surprise at his intelligence. She had already witnessed enough on the battlefield to accept it. "Yes," she said after a brief pause. "But not here," the elf continued. "This place is unsuitable. The damage to his soul is too deep and unstable. Proper treatment requires a controlled environment." She shifted slightly, her robes rustling as her gaze swept across the ruined 15th floor. "He would need to be brought to the elven realm." Spartan said nothing. Outwardly, he remained still, his expression unchanged. Inwardly, something stirred. Spartan did not possess emotions in the way living beings did, but his intelligence was refined enough to imitate their function. He could evaluate risk. He could weigh intent. He could experience something close to caution. And right now, what he felt was wariness. Another realm. Another place where his master would be vulnerable. Spartan did not think it was a good decision. He had studied the universe enough to know that power was rarely offered without cost, and even more rarely without strings attached. Carrying his master into the heart of another race's territory, no matter how renowned their healing arts were, felt dangerous. The elf noticed his silence. She waited a moment, then spoke again, her tone unchanged. "Your master elder may accompany us." She shifted her gaze slightly. "By that, I mean him." Her eyes settled on the old man from Michael's realm. At once, everyone understood who she meant. Spartan's head turned immediately. His gaze locked onto the old man. The old man stiffened, caught off guard by the sudden attention. For a brief moment their eyes met. One pair was ancient and human. The other was undead with cold, lifeless green light. Chapter 759 Solution. Spartan evaluated him. Rank 4. From the same realm. Connected to his master's origin. Acceptable. Not ideal but acceptable. The elf continued. He may observe the treatment. He may remain with the youth for the entire duration. He can also choose to intervene if necessary. Her eyes flicked briefly back to Spartan. "This is not a trap. Your master helped us, so treating him is only the right thing to do." Spartan did not respond immediately. He looked back at Michael. His master lay unconscious, pale beneath the sky, surrounded by the undead who would gladly die a second time for him. The life worm rested quietly in Spartan's hand, reminding him that his master's body was stable, but that was not enough. Spartan knew this. Physical wounds could be endured. Soul wounds were different. Left untreated, they would follow Michael forever. Spartan's fingers loosened slightly around the life worm. Then he looked back at the elf. "Will my master recover?" Spartan asked. The elf met his gaze without flinching. "He will live," she said, "and his foundation can be stabilized. Full recovery will take time." "That is acceptable," Spartan replied. He turned his head once more toward the old man. "You will go," Spartan said. At this, the old man raised an eyebrow as a thought flashed through his mind. Michael could not be abandoned. Not after everything that had happened here. Even if he wanted to distance himself, it could not be in front of the other races. Anything else would create the wrong image. Of his realm. Of himself. Of how they treated those who bled for them. In the universe, face and reputation mattered to most races. And beyond that, The old man's gaze drifted back to Michael's unconscious form. Whether he had known the youth for years or only for a few hours no longer mattered. Michael had already left an imprint heavy enough to demand responsibility. Aside from healing, there was another reason. Curiosity. The youth's mystery was too deep to ignore. Many of the things surrounding him did not feel like coincidences. Nor could they be explained away by calling Michael a genius. Genius did not explain everything. Too many questions remained unanswered. Once Michael was healed, or at least stabilized, the old man planned to take him back to the Federation and conduct a full background check. Not out of suspicion alone, but out of necessity. Slowly, the old man nodded. "I will go," he said. Spartan studied him for a heartbeat longer, then inclined his head once, just enough to signal acceptance. The elf exhaled softly. "Then we waste no more time. Go get your master." Spartan nodded and returned to his master's side, where he used his method to communicate with the other undead. Thanks to Michael's conscious and subconscious actions, many of his undead already knew the leaders within the Legion, making the decision easy. Once the decision was made, something happened that shocked the races around them. What first drew their attention was beginning reducing his size as another giant stepped forward. This one was female, Lily. She was nowhere near beginning in scale, but she still stood at 25 meters tall. After watching Beginning and Spartan take Michael away, she opened her mouth wide and inhaled. Under the shocked eyes of the gathered races, something unbelievable happened. The air around Lily twisted inward as if dragged by an invisible tide. Space bent slightly at the edges of her open mouth, and a low, hollow sound echoed across the ruined battlefield. One by one, the undead moved. They did not resist as they rose from the ground. Streams of undead converged toward Lily, their bodies dissolving into wisps of black, gray, and dark energy the moment they crossed the boundary of her maw. Each undead vanished cleanly, as if swallowed by the void, one after another. In mere seconds, the area around where Michael had been lay empty. The reaction was immediate. A chill ran through the ranks of the watching races. "Storage magic?" someone muttered. What Lily had just displayed was not a newly awakened ability. She had always possessed it, from the moment her law had taken shape. Lily's core authority was devouring. Within her stomach existed a naturally formed spatial cavity, one born directly from her law rather than constructed through techniques. A living space capable of holding vast quantities of matter, energy, and more. Anything swallowed by Lily was not destroyed unless she willed it so. The reason this ability had almost never been used like this before was simple. Michael did not trust it. He had tested Lily's devouring law more than once. Each time, something valuable had been lost by accident. On one particularly memorable occasion, an undead Michael had not intended to sacrifice was devoured. After that, Michael restricted the use of this storage space. But his undead did not know this, nor did they share his caution. They did not carry his past experiences. They only knew convenience. When Spartan communicated the decision, when the Legion understood that Michael would be moved, Lily's presence offered a simple solution, a safe place, close to their master. From their perspective, it was perfect. Lily herself did not object. She did not see them as food. Thus, without hesitation or fear, the undead allowed themselves to be drawn in. Thus, without hesitation or fear, the undead allowed themselves to be drawn in. The battlefield now stood nearly empty. Even the old man's eyes narrowed slightly. He still said nothing, but in his mind a quiet conclusion formed. This youth needs to be watched, and if possible, a complete account of how this undead came to be must be recorded in the Federation's records. Lily finished inhaling and closed her mouth. Then, slowly, her body began to shrink. 25 meters. 15. 10. Until she stood at a far more compact size, still massive by any normal standard, but no longer dominating the horizon. Chapter 760 Elven Territory. The three undead ascended into the air, moving toward the gathered race leaders. They stopped several steps away from the race leaders. Spartan was the first to speak. "We should begin moving," he said calmly. The elf did not respond immediately. Instead, she shook her head. Her gaze shifted downward. It lingered first on Michael. The unconscious youth lay completely naked in Spartan's arms. Then her eyes moved to Lily. Then to Beginning. Both undead giants were equally unclothed, their forms entirely unconcerned with modesty or concealment. Her gaze paused for half a breath longer on the lower half of Beginning's massive frame. She said nothing, but something in her expression tightened. Spartan followed her gaze, then looked back at her. Seconds passed. The elf finally realized something. The undead were staring at her in confusion. Took her a moment to understand why. Undead did not care. They had no instinctive sense of shame or cultural attachment to clothing. Even Spartan, who wore robes, only did so because he was trying to maintain the scholarly image he had formed after reading certain notes. Aside from this, he had no special thoughts about clothing. The realization made the elf representative clear her throat. "Clothing," she said. Spartan blinked. "Is it required for healing?" he asked. The elf paused, then shook her head slowly. "No," she admitted. "But it is required for entering another realm without causing unnecessary complications." "Then provide clothing," he said simply. In any case, he could not do it himself as he had no spare clothes. Even his own robe, which had survived the battle, was tattered in many places. Compared to the other two, however, he appeared dressed. The elf nodded, lifting her hand. Vines of pale green light unfurled from her sleeves, weaving rapidly in the air. Within moments, the light solidified. Simple garments formed. Loose robes for Spartan and Michael. Dense, reinforced coverings for Lily and Beginning, formed from layered vines capable of stretching and reshaping to accommodate their size. They were not elegant per se, but they were sufficient. If Michael had seen this, he would have clicked his tongue in awe of how one could actually use the mysterious magic to make clothes. It was oddly convenient. The robes settled over the undead forms. "Now," Spartan said, "we move." They nodded as she turned to the races beside them, not excluding. The silver-haired emissary elder. "We will not leave yet." This was essentially the answer from all of them, and their reason was valid. Before heading anywhere, they wanted to confirm their territories. Were safe. They had been fighting for so long, and no one knew whether the enemy had done anything to those places in their absence. The elf understood them as she planned to do the same. After all, to reach her home realm, she first needed to pass through the elven territory on the 15th floor of Hell. After speaking among themselves and carrying the corpses of their fallen comrades, the various races said nothing more as they immediately departed for their own territories. The undead and the old man followed the elves to theirs. Unlike some of the other floors of Hell with their bizarre worlds, the 15th floor looked relatively normal. It appeared very untouched, more like a pristine forest world. The elven territory lay within this floor. Since everyone in the group was rank 3, they reached their destination quickly, in just a couple of flashes using spatial teleportation. The elven territory was a forest within the greater forest world of the 15th floor of Hell. Tall trees grew close together, their trunks straight and ancient-looking, their branches interwoven overhead to form a natural canopy that filtered the light rather than blocking it. The forest floor was clean. Paths of packed earth and flattened roots ran between the trees, clearly walked often. Low shrubs and wild grass grew freely at the edges. The air beneath the canopy was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of leaves, soil, and wood. Elven dwellings were scattered throughout the forest, built with restraint and care. Some homes were set directly into the trees, shaped around living trunks, their wooden platforms supported by natural growth rather than cut beams. Others stood on the ground, modest wooden structures reinforced with stone at the base, blending into the surroundings instead of dominating them. Bridges of wood and rope connected higher dwellings. There were no towering walls or grand gates, only watch posts placed at natural vantage points, where elven guards stood quietly among the branches, observing. There were no signs of battle, no scorched ground, no broken structures, No blood. Everything was intact, orderly, and calm. The old man, standing beside the elf representative, scanned the territory carefully before speaking. It seems the evildoers were only after the races gathered for the battle, he said. They did not strike your territory. The elf's gaze remained forward as she replied. Or they were confident they could deal with this later. No one responded after that. Both turned their attention to the unconscious Michael in Spartans. Arms, odd expressions on their faces, before looking at each other. Again, a sudden disturbance rippled through the air above the forest. The elven guards in the branches reacted instantly, hands tightening on bows as a figure cut through the air between the trees. Someone was coming. Fast. She moved with urgency until she felt a strange pressure. Her body stiffened midair as her momentum faltered. She stopped abruptly, hovering several dozen meters away, eyes widening as a heavy, restrained aura brushed against her senses. Rank 4. Her gaze snapped toward its source. The old man. Then her eyes shifted again. To Spartan and the two huge figures behind him. To the unconscious human in his arms. And finally to the figures behind them. Several elves were carrying bodies. Some were wounded. Some were very still. The smell of blood followed them, faint but unmistakable. The woman's breath caught. Her lips trembled. Tears welled up and spilled freely down her cheeks before she even realized it. She flew closer slowly, arriving beside the elf representative. Sister. Her voice broke as she spoke. For the first time since the battle, the tight control in her expression cracked. Sister Lyrian, she said quietly. The two elves stared at each other for a heartbeat longer. Then the woman took the elf representative's hand. What happened? Lyrian asked, her voice trembling. Why is there a rank for here? Why are there wounded or dead brothers and sisters? Brought in from every direction. She swallowed hard. Why do I feel so many lives missing? The elf representative closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her voice was steady, but the weight behind it was undeniable. There was a battle, she said. One we could not avoid. Lyrian's fists clenched at her sides. Who? We'll talk about that later, but for now there is something else to deal with. I need to take the youth back home for healing, the elf representative said. Lyrian wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve and forced herself to breathe. Her gaze shifted once more to Michael. Who is he? She asked softly. Before anyone could answer, her eyes lingered on his pale face. She stared for a few more seconds, a strange expression on her face, before speaking again. Is this a half-elf? As she spoke, there was a hint of disdain in her voice. If one understood elven culture, it was not hard to see why. Among the elves, such a reaction was not uncommon. In the wider universe, elves were known as a proud race. To outsiders, that pride often appeared as grace, discipline, and an unyielding sense of tradition. But within elven society itself, that same pride cut far deeper and far sharper. Blood mattered. Purity mattered. To elves, lineage was not just heritage but identity. Their long lives, slow births, and deep connection to nature had shaped a culture that valued continuity above all else. Anything that disrupted that continuity was seen as a flaw. Half-elves were part of that disruption. They were living reminders of dilution. Neither fully elf nor fully of another race, half-elves occupied an uncomfortable space that elven society never truly accepted. They aged faster. Their affinity with nature was inconsistent. Their mana patterns were unstable by elven standards. To many elves, these traits were proof enough that half-elves were incomplete beings. Impure. Half-elves were often barred from positions of authority, excluded from sacred groves, and quietly pushed to the edges of elven settlements. Even when allowed to live among elves, they were reminded constantly, through silence more than words, that they did not truly belong. And among more traditional factions, the mere existence of a half-elf was considered a stain on elven dignity. That was why Lyrian's voice carried that edge. That was why her eyes lingered on Michael with a mixture of scrutiny and discomfort. Chapter 761 Elven Realm on. However, she was mistaken. Michael was no half-elf, even though he gave off a faint sense of kinship. When the elf representative, whose name was Serena, clarified this, Lyrian was even more surprised. However, due to the presence of the old man far above her in status, she kept her further thoughts to herself. Though elves considered themselves superior to other races, they still possessed common sense. For a powerful figure like the old man, basic consideration had to be given. If her leader could do so, then why could she not? Although elves often preached dignity and humility, they were largely unaware of how terrible their image appeared to many other races. Serena raised a hand. "That is enough," she said, her voice calm but firm. The tension in the air eased slightly at her words. Even Lyrian straightened instinctively, wiping the remaining tears from her face and lowering her gaze in acknowledgement. Serena turned to her. "Lyrian," she said, "take some of our brothers and sisters to the healing facility immediately. Prioritize the wounded who can still be saved." Her gaze shifted briefly to the bodies being carried in the background. "And ensure the fallen are handled with care." Lyrian hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the stretchers again, then back to Serena. "You are returning home," she said quietly. "If that is the case, why not bring them as well?" Her voice trembled, but there was resolve beneath it. They laid down their lives for the realm. This should be the moment they are honored properly, not delayed or hidden away. The forest fell silent. Serena did not answer immediately, but she understood better than anyone. She looked at the bodies, at the still forms of elves who would never walk these paths again, never return to their homes, never see the forest they had defended. "I understand," Serena said at last, "and they will be honored." She met Lyrian's eyes. "But not like this." Lyrian frowned slightly. "If we return now with the dead, without explanation and without preparation, it will only spread confusion and fear," Serena continued. "Families will see bodies before they hear the truth. Rumors will move faster than reason." She lowered her voice. "The atmosphere there is calm. If we shatter that without context, we will only deepen the wound." Lyrian's shoulders sagged. Serena placed a hand on her arm. "We have been away for too long," she said. "We need to know what has happened in the realm during our absence. We need to assess the situation, speak with the elders, and prepare them." Her eyes hardened slightly. "Only then will we bring the fallen home, with full respect and clarity." Lyrian closed her eyes. After a moment, she nodded. "I understand," she said softly. She turned and issued quiet instructions to the elves behind her. The wounded were separated carefully and guided deeper into the forest toward the healing facility. The fallen were carried away with equal care, their bodies covered, their names spoken softly among those who bore them. As the forest resumed its quiet rhythm, Serena looked back toward the old man. "Please, let us move. We have taken too much time." Serena turned without another word and descended from the air with everyone as the group began walking deeper into the forest. The path narrowed as it descended, winding between thicker clusters of trees where the canopy grew denser and the light dimmed naturally. Roots crossed the ground like veins, polished smooth by centuries of footsteps. The sounds of the settlement faded behind them, replaced by the quiet rhythm of leaves shifting and distant water flowing somewhere unseen. Spartan followed at her side, Michael still held carefully in his arms. Lily and Beginning moved behind them. The old man walked slightly to Serena's other side, his gaze never fully relaxing as he studied the land they passed through. Elven guards appeared more frequently the deeper they went. Some stood on elevated platforms between trees. Others watched from the forest floor, hands resting near their weapons. Every one of them straightened the moment Serena passed. Recognition. Immediate. None questioned her authority. A few glanced briefly at Michael and his group, curiosity flickering across their faces before discipline took over. Eventually, the path opened into a natural clearing. At its center stood a structure that did not belong to the forest, yet did not disrupt it either. A gate. Two massive stone pillars rose from the earth, ancient and weathered, their surfaces etched with simple runes worn smooth by time rather than magic. Between them stretched an empty archway where the air itself felt heavier and denser, as though space had been folded and anchored in place. This was the portal. It was not active yet. Around it stood several elves in formal armor, their expressions serious, their weapons grounded but ready. Unlike the patrol guards, above, these were gatekeepers, veterans who carried themselves with quiet confidence. The moment Serena stepped into the clearing, every guard straightened. One of them stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Supervisor Serena," he said, "we sensed your return, but not this." His gaze drifted to the old man, then to Spartan, then to the massive undead behind them. "How is it?" Serena asked. "Stable," the guard replied at once. Serena nodded. "That is good." She stepped closer to the gate and placed a hand against one of the stone pillars. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Then she opened them again. "Prepare it," she said. "We are passing through." The guards moved immediately, splitting to their assigned positions around the archway. One began issuing quiet commands while another retrieved a signaling device from his belt. Serena turned back toward the others. "This gate leads into the Elven realm," she said, her tone precise. Her eyes lingered briefly on Michael. "He will be taken directly to the healing sanctuary." Spartan inclined his head slightly. "That is acceptable." The old man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the gate. Chapter 762 Elven Realm 2. The guards finished their preparations. The space within the archway began to shift subtly. Serena stepped aside and gestured forward. "Stay close," she said. Spartan adjusted his grip on Michael and stepped toward the gate. Lily followed. Beginning brought up the rear. Once the portal stabilized, none of them hesitated as they stepped into the gate. The sensation of movement vanished abruptly. One moment they were passing through the gate. The next they were standing inside a sealed space. It was a wide chamber carved from pale stone and living wood, smooth and undecorated. The ceiling arched naturally overhead, supported by thick roots that had been shaped rather than cut. Small openings provided light, but there were no windows, no visible exits. The air was still and heavy, carrying the faint scent of earth and sap. The gate behind them was inactive. The change was immediate. Spartan shifted his stance, feet spreading slightly as his grip on Michael tightened. Lily lowered her posture, her massive frame angling forward. Beginning straightened, his presence pressing outward like a restrained storm. The pressure in the room spiked. Faint disturbances rippled along the walls as hidden mechanisms responded, layers of containment and observation activating silently. Serena raised a hand. "That is enough," she said calmly. Her voice cut through the tension without force. "This is only procedure." The undead did not relax, but they did not escalate further. Serena turned slightly, addressing Spartan directly. "Verification is done here before we can enter the realm fully," she continued. "Everyone who enters passes through this chamber." Spartan's gaze never left the walls, his perception sweeping every corner. "How long will this take?" he asked. "Moments," Serena replied. "Those on the other side are being notified. Once they are ready, the passage will open." She then turned toward the old man. "This applies to your presence as well," she added. "Certain protocols must be acknowledged." The old man studied the room, his eyes tracing the subtle layering of space and authority embedded into the stone. He felt it clearly now. This was not a trap. It was a checkpoint. He gave a small nod. "That is reasonable." Serena lowered her hand. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "We will not delay longer than necessary." Soon, a low hum spread through the chamber. The wall parted. Light spilled in from the other side. The moment the opening widened enough to reveal what lay beyond, the atmosphere changed. On the far side of the doorway stood a formation of elves in full armor. Their suits were fitted and layered, shaped from pale alloy and reinforced plates etched with thin, circuit-like patterns. Their helmets were open-faced, visors resting at their temples, eyes sharp and focused, and in their hands were weapons. Long, sleek firearms formed from the same pale alloy, their barrels narrow and angular. The instant the undead saw them, they reacted. Lily's massive body shifted forward a fraction. Beginning's presence surged, tightening the air around him. Spartan adjusted his grip on Michael as his free hand lowered slightly. Ready. Before anyone on the other side could speak, Serena's voice cut through the tension. "Stand down," she said sharply. Her authority was unmistakable. The undead halted immediately. The pressure they had released froze in place, then receded just enough to signal restraint. Serena stepped forward, placing herself squarely between both sides. "These are allies," she said without turning back. "Lower your weapons." The elves did not move. Instead, the one standing at the center of the formation took a single step forward. His armor bore subtle markings denoting rank. His gaze swept over Serena, the old man, Spartan, and finally the massive figures behind them. "Identify yourselves," he said, his voice steady and faintly amplified by his suit. "State your authority and purpose." Serena did not hesitate. She straightened, shoulders squared, and spoke clearly. "Serena Eltherin Veilcross Sylvan," she said, her full name flowing. Without pause, supervisor of the Elven station stationed on the 15th floor of Hell. A brief pause followed. Several of the armed elves stiffened visibly. The leader's eyes narrowed, then widened just slightly. "Supervisor Serena," he repeated. His gaze flicked past her to the old man, registering the restrained rank for aura. Then to the undead. Then to the unconscious human, in Spartan's arms. "What is the situation?" he asked, his tone shifting from challenge to protocol. "A medical emergency," Serena replied immediately. "The human has sustained critical damage at the soul level. He is to be transferred directly to the healing sanctuary." The leader raised a hand. Behind him, the formation adjusted. Weapons lowered, not fully, but enough to indicate compliance. "Please follow me for additional verification," he said. "It will not take long." Serena nodded once. "Understood." She then turned slightly toward Spartan, Lily, and Beginning. "Wait here," she ordered. "Do not move unless I return and tell you to." Spartan's eyes remained fixed on the armed elves, his stance still, guarded. "How long?" he asked. "Moments," Serena replied again, her tone unchanged. "This is procedure, nothing more." She glanced at the old man. He gave a small nod, confirming the same conclusion he had reached earlier. This was not a trap. It was how a realm protected itself when threats could emerge through gates without warning. Serena stepped forward and followed the armored leader through the doorway. The opening narrowed behind her, not fully closed, but partially sealed. Voices carried faintly from beyond. Spartan did not shift an inch. He stood like a statue, Michael's weight balanced perfectly in his arms. The others remained still as well, with the exception of the old man, who shifted slightly, discomfort flickering across his expression. Time passed. Then the partial seal released with a soft sound. The doorway widened again. Serena reappeared. Her expression was unchanged. She stepped back into the chamber and raised her hand. "We can proceed," she said simply. "The verification is complete." The armed leader behind her gave a short nod, then addressed his soldiers. "Lower weapons. Escort formation. Priority path to the healing sanctuary." The guns did not disappear, but their barrels dropped further, signaling full compliance. Serena turned to Spartan. "Now," she said firmly, "follow me, and do not deviate." Spartan did not respond with words. He simply moved. Lily and Beginning followed. The old man walked beside Serena this time, silent as he ignored the guarded looks of the others, already adjusting to the restrictive pressure of the Elven realm after leaving Hell. Chapter 763 Elven Realm 3. Invasion was not an unfamiliar concept in the wider universe. It simply meant one realm taking control of another, or being swallowed by a stronger one. There were many reasons it happened. Some realms were rich in resources that could not be replicated elsewhere. When such resources existed in limited quantity, conflict was inevitable. Other times it was about position. Certain realms sat at key junctions between planes, acting as natural gateways for trade, travel, or military movement. Controlling such a realm meant a lot of things. In a universe where distance could be crossed in moments, location still mattered. There were also realms that were simply weak. Newly formed worlds. Damaged realms recovering from catastrophe. Civilizations that had not yet matured enough to defend themselves. To stronger powers, these were opportunities. And sometimes invasion had nothing to do with wealth or strategy. Overpopulation forced expansion. Dying worlds could also push their people outward in desperation. Yet, despite how common invasion was, its implementation was not exactly simple. Aside from factors like military strength, there was also something else that had to do with the realm. It was also one of the reasons why, aside from newly discovered worlds with no inhabitants, conquered realms usually never had a huge population of their conquerors in their land. This was because of realm suppression. Realm suppression was not a mystery once one understood how realms were born. A realm did not begin as a world in the way most people imagined. At first, it was only a pocket of space that had stabilized long enough to hold form. A knot of laws, a fixed boundary, and a core. Some were born naturally from cosmic collisions. Some formed around ancient remnants. Some were the result of broken planes that fused into something new. In the early stage, such a place was fragile. Its borders were thin. Its rules were inconsistent. Time could flow strangely. Space could fold wrong. The environment could shift. Without warning, if the realm survived long enough, it began to settle. Mountains became mountains. Rivers chose their paths and kept them. Seasons became predictable. And the laws that governed everything inside stopped fluctuating and hardened into structure. That was how a realm grew. As that stability deepened, something else emerged. A will. Not the will of a person, but the realm's own instinct to remain itself. It was subtle at first, expressed through natural correction. Foreign energy that did not fit would be pushed out. Techniques that violated the realm's established rules would weaken. Those who stayed too long without adapting would feel a pressure, like the world itself was rejecting them. Over time, that will became clearer and more purposeful. The realm began to distinguish between what belonged and what did not. It recognized native patterns, tolerated familiar energy, it supported those who matched its rhythm, and it resisted everything else. That resistance was realm suppression. It was why invaders often arrived with overwhelming force, yet still struggled to maintain control. In contrast, natives moved naturally. That was also why conquerors rarely flooded a conquered realm with their own population. Even if they won militarily, the realm itself would grind them down over time unless they paid a massive cost to adapt. Realm suppression could also be weaker or stronger depending on another factor: how the realm advanced after becoming a world. As realms continued to mature, some reached a critical point. By then, their laws were no longer merely stable. The realm's will, which had once acted only through instinctive rejection and correction, began to seek an anchor. That anchor was always a native. Realm masters were never outsiders. They were born of the land, shaped by its laws from the very beginning. Their bodies, souls, and growth paths were naturally aligned with the realm's rhythm. Because of that, when the realm reached for a representative, it could only choose from its own children. And among those natives, only two kinds were ever chosen: the strongest, or the most extraordinary. When such a person resonated deeply enough, the bond formed. The moment someone became a realm master, their status changed fundamentally. They did not grow infinitely stronger, nor did they break the realm's limits. Instead, they were elevated to the absolute peak of what the realm itself allowed. Whatever the maximum permitted power was within that world, the realm master stood there instantly. Foreigners could not match them without paying a severe price in their own realm. More importantly, the realm's will could grow too, which in turn was the Realm Master. With a Realm Master, if before the will had acted through instinct, after a Realm Master emerged, it gained intent. The will no longer reacted blindly. It acted with judgment based on the Realm Master's wishes. Through the Realm Master, the world could focus its suppression on specific targets. It could reinforce chosen areas, weaken invaders selectively, and even go as far as weakening the power of the opposition. In essence, the realm was no longer alone. It had someone beside it. That was why invading a mature realm with a Realm Master was exponentially harder than conquering one without one. However, becoming a Realm Master was not a blessing without cost. The bond went both ways. The moment a native accepted the role, their future was tied to the realm's growth. Their potential became capped by the world itself. No matter how talented they were, no matter how extraordinary their path, they could never exceed what the realm was capable of supporting. In theory, a Realm Master could rise from mortal to godhood in an instant if the realm's permitted limit was that high. It was an exaggerated way of describing the effect, but the idea was accurate. The realm elevated them to its ceiling immediately. But that ceiling was also a prison. If the realm could only support power up to a certain level, then that was where the Realm Master would remain forever. Even if their personal talent suggested they could go beyond godhood, even if their comprehension or ambition surpassed the world they stood on, they would be unable to break through. The realm would not allow it. Another restriction was distance. A Realm Master could not leave their realm freely. The farther they moved away, the weaker the connection became and the heavier the backlash. Long-term absence was impossible. Extended travel across planes was forbidden. At most, they could project influence, avatars, or limited manifestations, but their true self was anchored. They were not rulers who traveled the universe. They were guardians bound to a single land. There were other costs as well. Their fate became intertwined with the realm's stability. If the realm was damaged, they suffered. If the realm weakened, they weakened. If the realm faced extinction, the Realm Master would be dragged down with it. Because of this, the realm's will could not force the bond. Consent was required. The world could reach out, but the chosen individual had to accept. And many of the truly extraordinary refused. For beings who sought boundless growth, endless exploration, or transcendence beyond worlds, becoming a Realm Master was a form of confinement. A glorious cage, perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. This was also why many dominant races across the universe did not have Realm Masters. Setting aside the realm's own strict selection, most powerful figures from large and expansive races would never agree to such restrictions. They valued freedom, expansion, and supremacy across multiple realms. Being bound to a single world, no matter how strong it made them within it, was unacceptable. So while Realm Masters existed, they were mostly only common in weaker realms, but still rare nevertheless. Back to suppression, what the old man was currently feeling was this so-called realm suppression. It was not as terrible as the one from hell since he had recovered his realm, but it was still annoying to deal with. The old man had only just stepped past the threshold of the building. When the space behind him twisted, a narrow tear opened. From it stepped an elf. He appeared middle-aged, with long silver hair bound loosely at his back and calm, sharp eyes that carried the weight of centuries. Unlike the armored guards or tactical personnel they had passed earlier, this elf wore traditional ceremonial robes. Layered fabric of deep green and white draped over his frame, embroidered with leaf patterns. His body pulsed faintly with restrained power. Rank 4. The moment his feet touched the ground, his gaze locked onto a single figure. The old man. Nothing else in the space seemed to exist to him. Spartan, Lily, Beginning, Serena, the armed escorts, even the unconscious Michael in Spartan's arms were all ignored as completely as furniture. His eyes did not flicker. His attention did not waver. He took a step forward and inclined his head slightly. "Esteemed guest," the elf said, his voice warm and refined, carrying the tone of a host. The old man turned slowly, meeting the elf's gaze without releasing even a trace of pressure. The two rank for existences regarded each other in silence, their auras brushing lightly, testing without hostility. Chapter 764 Treatment 1. /N. Some readers did not take good to the previous chapter and some points are valid. I really apologize and will do more to prevent info dumps or focusing on the wrong things. Asterisk. The middle-aged elf held the old man's gaze as he wondered what race he was from. At first glance, the old man looked human. That alone meant nothing. The universe was filled with humanoid races. Thousands upon thousands of them. Most of them shared the same basic shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, familiar facial structure. Unless a race carried a distinct trait, there was no reliable way to identify them at a glance. The Starborn were obvious, with their blue, star-speckled skin. The Drakeblood were just as easy, with scales, horns, or other monster traits that betrayed their bloodline no matter how well they hid it. But if a race was close enough to baseline, then even a careful observer could only guess. One would need deep specialization, knowledge of regional lineages, and the habit of studying subtle markers. The elf did not. He was not a scholar of bloodlines. He was a guardian of this post, and one who handled matters that required strength and authority. But as the thought about the old man's possible origins drifted through his mind, another followed immediately, sharp and unwelcome. Elves were also humanoid. The realization hit him like a quiet slap. His expression did not change, but inwardly he stiffened. Comparing his people to the countless human-like races of the universe felt wrong, almost disrespectful. Felt like blasphemy. He could almost hear it. The past queens and rulers of the realm looking down on him. Humanoid? Is that how you reduce us now? Absolutely not. He cut the thought off at once and offered a silent apology in his heart to the past queens and rulers he had respected, as if they might somehow hear him and judge him for entertaining such a careless comparison. In fairness, elves did tend to have more queens than kings. It was a simple matter of numbers. Female elves made up a larger portion of the population, lived slightly longer on average, and were more likely to remain within the realm rather than wander. Leadership followed availability as much as talent. That did not mean elves were a woman-led society. They were not like the Amazari, where matriarchs ruled by unquestioned doctrine and male authority was more ceremonial than real. Elven leadership was pragmatic. Whoever was best suited led, regardless of gender. It just so happened that, more often than not, that person was a woman. Still, there was no excuse to lump elvenkind into the same vague category as human-like races. Absolutely not. Of course, none of that surfaced on his face. As a rank 4, he had to give the other party face. He had been informed that a rank 4 had arrived. This meant the other party carried considerable risk for him to evaluate. However, there was no need to be blunt. Not yet. So he smiled faintly and kept the tone of a host. "Welcome," he said again, his voice smooth. "May I ask your name and origin," he continued, "so that I may address you properly?" The old man did not hesitate. "I am Selim Ardent, a Star General of the Aurora Federation," he said calmly. "I am here to assist a junior of my race who needs urgent healing." The words landed softly, but they did not pass unnoticed. For a brief moment, several elves, Serena included, paused almost imperceptibly before regaining their composure. Aurora. The Aurora realm was particular. It was not counted among the ancient hegemonies of the universe, nor was it known for overwhelming military might or god-level figures that shaped epochs. But it was impossible to ignore, because Aurora was growing fast. Civilizations usually followed a predictable path. If not conquered, they developed internally, awakened magic or equivalent systems, and only then began to seriously interact with the wider universe after reaching a certain peak in that system. Aurora had broken that pattern. It was often theorized that they were one of the rare civilizations to step beyond their realm before fully understanding magic or even coming into contact with it. At first, many had dismissed those theories. Aside from races like the Starborn, how many could truly stand strong with technology alone? Not all races were peculiar like the Starborn, after all. However, Aurora kept expanding. They built realm-level fleets before they had gods. They took over realms with realm masters who were even more powerful than their strongest individuals. And somehow, impossibly, they survived it. By now, it was widely accepted that Aurora was one of the fastest-growing civilizations in the known universe. Not the strongest, but the trajectory alone was enough to make people take notice. Hearing that a star general from Aurora stood here in person was quite surprising. Serena's surprise was brief but genuine. Her eyes flicked toward Selim for half a breath before she masked it completely. The middle-aged elf felt the same flicker of reaction. Aurora. So that was it. Still, his reaction was not one of fear. Aurora was not an enemy of the elven realms, nor were they a dominant power that demanded immediate caution. This was simply unexpected. A star general here, in person. The middle-aged elf finally shifted his attention. His gaze moved to Serena. Only then did he truly register her condition. Her armor was scratched and dulled. There was dust in her hair, faint discoloration along her sleeves, and a tired tightness around her eyes that no amount of composure could fully hide. It was the same restrained weariness he recognized in Selim himself. They looked like people who had walked a long road without rest. Then his eyes drifted again. The undead. He had known what they were from the moment he arrived. There was no mistaking it. As an elf whose affinity with nature deepened, the stronger he became. Undeath was something he felt long before he saw it. They stirred a faint, instinctive repulsion in him, a reflex born from centuries of communion with living systems. But he ignored it for now. Asterisk. Next chapter has been edited. Chapter 765 Treatment 2. Refresh to clear duplicate. The elf turned slightly toward Serena, his lips never moving as his voice slipped into a controlled transmission that only she could hear. Who is the boy? His eyes did not leave the unconscious figure in Spartan's arms. He already knew the answer could not be simple. As a rank 4, he understood the cost of what was being done here. Elven treatment at this level was not something offered lightly. It consumed resources and favor. It was reserved for those whose existence mattered. Of course, not all elven treatment cost one's entire fortune. But the condition he could faintly sense from the boy was one that did. No rank 4 escorted an ordinary child across realms. Serena's reply came just as quietly. I don't know for certain, she said, but I suspect he may be a holy child of the Aurora realm. There was a pause. The middle-aged elf wanted to raise an eyebrow. Every realm that survived long enough, every civilization that grew powerful enough, eventually produced such figures. Children born at convergence points of fate. Sometimes they became symbols, sometimes weapons, sometimes disasters, sometimes saviors, sometimes realm masters. There were not many things that could truly interest him when it came to other races. He had lived too long, seen too much, and weighed too many external affairs to be easily stirred. But a holy child of a fast-growing realm like Aurora? That was different, very different. His gaze sharpened almost imperceptibly as he studied the unconscious boy again. So this was the reason. A seed important enough for Aurora to send a star general himself. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Elves were indifferent to many things, but a holy child was not quite on the list of things they could ignore, especially when it came from a strong race. Then we should not delay any longer, the middle-aged elf said. If the youth's condition is as severe as it appears, every moment wasted only narrows the paths available to us. His gaze shifted briefly toward Spartan and the unconscious boy in his arms. This time, there was no trace of repulsion or judgment in his eyes, only assessment. Elven healing is effective, he continued, but it is not omnipotent. The earlier we begin, the better the outcome, especially for a soul-level injury. Selim inclined his head in response. My thanks, the old man said simply. The elf met his gaze again, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. He turned slightly, gesturing forward with one hand. I will personally authorize immediate passage to the inner sanctuary, he said. All secondary procedures can be handled afterward. Serena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She gave a short nod, relief flickering across her expression before discipline smoothed it away. "As you command," she said. The middle-aged elf took one last look at the unconscious boy. Michael had no idea what was going on in the real world. After losing consciousness, he found himself in a half-awake, half-asleep state. He did not know how long he spent in it. Half awake, he could subtly hear what was going on outside. Soul injury, elven realm, strange physique, some clash of battle. Wait, someone was fighting? Where? With a bit struggle, Michael opened his eyes. The first thing he felt was warmth. He was lying on a wide surface grown from smooth living wood. Moss-soft fibers lined the edges, cool against his skin. Above him, the ceiling rose in a natural arch. Thick roots formed its frame. Small leaves grew along them, healthy and quiet, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. Light filtered in from narrow openings high above, scattered and soft, like sunlight passing through a forest canopy. It painted the room in shades of green and gold. The walls were not walls in the usual sense. They were grown trunks and stone fused together, seamless. Clear pools of water were set into the floor at intervals, their surfaces perfectly still, reflecting the leaves overhead. The air was clean. It smelled of damp earth, fresh bark, and flowing water. Each breath felt lighter than the last, as if the room itself was easing the weight. From his chest, Michael tried to move. His head throbbed. Fragments of memory drifted back. Then he faintly heard sounds beyond the room, breaking his thoughts. It was like a low echo of force meeting force. The room did not react or reflect what was going on outside. The leaves did not shake. The water did not ripple. The ground was steady. Whatever was happening outside, this place was able to endure it. Michael slowly became aware of himself. He shifted his focus to his body. Roots covered him. They were thick and pale green, wrapped carefully around his arms, legs, chest, and waist. They did not feel tight or restrictive. Instead, they pressed gently against his skin, pulsing faintly, as if they were breathing along with him. A cool, strange paste coated large portions of his body. It was green, deep and earthy, smeared across his chest, shoulders, and limbs in uneven layers. It smelled faintly of crushed leaves and sap. Michael flexed his fingers slightly. They moved. No pain followed. He glanced down further, taking stock of himself more carefully. His skin was unbroken. No scars. No wounds. No lingering damage from the battle he vaguely remembered. It looked as though nothing had ever happened to him at all. Good as new. And yet, Michael frowned faintly. Something was wrong. The weakness he felt was still there. It was subtle, deep, and hard to define. It did not come from his muscles. When he shifted his arm again, there was strength there. His breathing was steady. His heartbeat was calm. It was not physical. The sensation was heavier, sitting somewhere behind his chest and behind his thoughts, like exhaustion that sleep could not touch. Like something inside him had been scraped thin and had not yet grown back. Soul injury. The words drifted back to him from earlier, half-heard voices echoing through his haze. So that was it. Michael exhaled slowly. Another sound reached him, distant, muted, a dull, rhythmic pressure, like waves crashing far away or thunder, rolling behind a mountain range. Force meeting force. It sounded like a battle. Michael's eyes flicked toward the edges of the room, instinctively, searching for movement, but nothing reacted. Chapter 766. You look like a fraud. 1. Michael felt uneasy. The calm of the room wrapped around him like a blanket, but instead of comfort, it made the distant sounds beyond its walls feel heavier. He pushed himself up slowly. The roots loosened their hold at once, reacting to his movement. The green paste on his skin dried slightly as the roots retreated, flaking away in thin layers that crumbled into the floor and vanished. Michael swung his legs down and stood. There was no dizziness, no physical weakness. His balance was steady, his breathing even. Yet the strange hollowness inside him remained, faint but undeniable. He clenched his fist once, then relaxed it. Cannot stay here. The thought came naturally. Michael turned his head toward the far side of the chamber. A doorway stood there. It was open. Beyond it, soft green light spilled inward. His heart began to beat faster. As he took his first step forward, another instinct rose inside him. His undead. For a brief, sharp moment, fear stabbed through his chest. He reached out instinctively to the bond that tied him to them. The response came instantly. Dozens of presences answered him at once. And they were close. Michael's breath caught for a second before he let it out slowly. His heart calmed. The tight knot in his chest loosened, replaced by a quiet relief that made his shoulders sag slightly. The fear that he might have lost all of them dissolved. Then another thought followed. The ones that did not answer. More than 100 presences were gone. Michael stopped walking. Images flickered through his mind. Memories of the battle rose again in fragments. This was the most serious battle he had fought since coming to this world. Michael's jaw tightened. Before, he had been comfortable with his strength. Confident. He had believed he was prepared for what this world could throw at him. Now that comfort felt thin. Insufficient. I need more. More strength. More power. Not for pride or to show off. Just so he would never feel this helpless again. As he reached the doorway, another question surfaced in his mind. Were his undead the ones who brought him here, given how they surrounded him? Michael did not call them back. He wanted to see the situation for himself and avoid drawing attention if there was any to be drawn outside the doors. He could only hope the sounds of the commotion he was hearing were not coming from his undead. As several thoughts flashed through his mind, Michael stepped through the doorway. Michael stepped out. The sight in front of him made him stop. A vast forest stretched endlessly ahead, layered in depth and color. Towering trees rose high into the sky, their trunks thick and ancient. Wide canopies overlapped above, filtering the light into soft beams that painted the ground in shifting shades of green. The leaves were alive with motion. The ground beneath his feet was firm soil mixed with roots and moss. Flowers bloomed in quiet clusters along the paths, their colors muted and calm rather than flashy. Clear streams cut through the forest at intervals, their water so pure it reflected the sky and the leaves above with perfect clarity. Michael stared. This did not look like hell. Not even remotely. His first instinct was disbelief. His second was confusion. Which floor is this? He drew in a slow breath. His eyes widened slightly. Mana. Dense, rich mana saturated the atmosphere, pressing gently against his senses from every direction. This level of mana density was far beyond anything he had experienced before. It was many times higher than Aurora. Michael exhaled slowly, his heartbeat quickening despite himself. Where was this place? At this point, Michael felt like consulting his undead was the best option. After reaching out to several of them, he found they were just as confused as he was. They all said the same thing. They had simply found themselves here and were ordered to guard Michael. As for who could command his undead aside from him, it could only be higher-level undead, yet for some reason he could not sense them. Spartan and Ghost, for example, were nowhere to be found. As for Beginning and Lily, he could sense them close by, but they seemed to be asleep. All of this made Michael alert. Fade? Michael called out into the empty air as the shadow beneath his feet moved. Congratulations on your recovery, Master. The voice rose softly from behind him. Michael turned. The shadow at his feet rippled, then peeled away from the ground like a curtain being drawn aside. Fade emerged soundlessly, his form stabilizing as he lowered himself into a respectful bow. Thanks, Michael said without thinking. The word left his mouth naturally. Only after it did he pause. Did I just thank an undead? The thought surfaced briefly, then vanished just as fast. He had done countless times before. There was nothing strange about it anymore. Michael's gaze sharpened as another question followed immediately. Why weren't you with me inside? He asked. You only came close. After I stepped out. Fade straightened slightly, his expression unchanged. The chamber you were placed in contained energy that is harmful to undead like me, he replied evenly. It was not lethal, but prolonged exposure would have caused degradation. We detected its nature the moment you were taken inside. Michael frowned faintly. And you just stayed out? Yes, Fade said. We knew the space was meant for healing. We could sense your condition at all times through the bond. There was no indication of danger to your life. Forcing entry would have interfered with the process and possibly worsened your state. He lowered his head again. I apologize for not remaining at your side. Michael shook his head at once. It's fine, he said. You made the right call. Fade paused for half a second, then inclined his head deeper. As you say, Master. Michael looked past him, back at the forest. Then he glanced back at Fade. Do you know where we are? He asked. Chapter 767. You look like a fraud. 2. Refresh to clear errors. Do you know where we are? Michael asked. Fade answered without hesitation. We are in the Elven Realm, he said. Michael froze. The Elven Realm? He repeated, as if the words refused to settle in his mind. His eyes swept across the forest again. The towering trees, the clean air, the mana so dense it clung to his skin like mist. He had assumed this was some strange pocket on a lower floor of hell. But a realm? A full realm? How? His chest tightened, and unease rose before he could suppress it. How did I get here? Michael asked, his voice sharper than he intended. Fade remained calm. You fell unconscious, he said. The damage to your soul was severe. Your state was unstable. Fade continued without pause. After you lost consciousness, Spartan approached the other race leaders. He asked if there was a way to stabilize your condition. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. And the elven leader present at the time said yes, Fade replied. But you would need to be brought to their realm for proper treatment. So that was it. Michael had already suspected as much. Still, hearing it stated plainly made the shock settle deeper. This was not travel between continents. Not even between planets. This was universal travel. Leaving one realm entirely and entering another. Michael looked at the forest again, and for a moment it did not feel real. It was as if the world had changed while he was asleep, and he had woken up in a place he was never meant to reach. One moment he had been fighting for his life, bound to his own realm. Now he was standing in another realm entirely, surrounded by towering trees and mana so dense it filled every breath. The distance between here and where he came from was not something he could walk or fly across. It was the distance between worlds. That thought settled heavily in his chest. Even the thick mana in the air felt less important than that truth. He was somewhere else entirely. He swallowed. So Spartan agreed, Michael said quietly. Fade nodded. He did, he said. He judged that remaining where you were would lead to further collapse. He chose the option that gave you the highest chance of survival. Michael closed his eyes for a second. He could not fault Spartan for that. Not when his soul had been on the verge of breaking. Still, the weight remained. The strange awareness that he was standing in another realm entirely. Michael opened his eyes and looked at Fade. Where is Spartan? He asked. Fade lifted one arm and pointed into the distance. Far beyond the forest canopy, the sky was no longer a calm blend of green and blue. Bands of color twisted and overlapped high above the treetops. Even from here, the air in that direction felt heavier, sharper. Michael had noticed it the moment he stepped outside. To be honest, he had expected this. Over there? Michael asked quietly. Yes, Fade replied. That is where Spartan is. Michael's gaze hardened. Doing what? Fade did not hesitate. He is fighting. The word landed heavily. A knot formed in Michael's chest. Fighting. In the Elven realm. That did not sound good. Not in the slightest. He had barely woken up, barely grasped where he was, and already one of his strongest undead was clashing with something. This was not a lawless battlefield or a hostile domain where conflict was. expected. This was elven territory. Michael exhaled slowly, forcing his thoughts to stay steady. Who? He asked. And why? Fade's gaze shifted slightly before returning to him. It is because of you, he said. Michael blinked. Me? The word escaped before he could stop it. Confusion crept into his expression. I was unconscious, he said. What could I possibly have done? Fade did not answer immediately. He looked toward the forest first, then back at Michael as if weighing how much to say. While you were unconscious, Fade began. Many elves attempted to approach you. Michael's brow furrowed. Approach me how? They attempted to sneak closer to observe you, Fade replied calmly. Some wished only to look. Others attempted to probe. A few attempted to touch. Michael's eyes narrowed. And you stopped them. Yes, Fade said. Every time. A flicker of cold irritation rose in Michael's chest. How many times? He asked. Fade paused. Enough. Michael let out a slow breath through his nose. Then how did it turn into this? He asked. Into fighting? Fade's eyes darkened slightly. At first, the encounters were brief, he said. But, Michael pressed. But the situation changed, Fade continued. How? I do not know, Master, Fade said. Only that the elves became increasingly focused on defeating us. The healer who treated you said that if we prevailed, your treatment cost would be reduced. So we complied. He added calmly, the elves are no trouble anyway. Just as Fade finished speaking, the air beside them tore open. Two thin rips appeared in empty space, silent and clean, as if the world itself had been sliced apart. One tear widened first. A familiar figure stepped out. Selim Ardent. The old man's coat was clean now, his posture relaxed, and there was a lightness in his eyes that had not been there earlier. It was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Then the second tear expanded. An old woman emerged. Her hair was silver and long, flowing down her back like a veil. Her ears were long and sharp, and the lines on her face were fine rather than harsh, as though time had treated her gently. She wore layered elven cultural robes, simple yet dignified, and her gaze carried authority without effort. An elf. The moment her feet touched the ground, she looked at Michael, then at Fade, then back at Michael. Her voice was steady. The elves are no trouble, you say? She repeated. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Selim turned his head toward her. You should not mind what the dead says, he replied. The words sounded dismissive, but the curve at the edge of his mouth betrayed him. He was happy. Chapter 768 Pride of a Realm 1. Aurora was called many things in the universe among the races that knew it. Second only to the Starborn when it came to technological advancement. Possessor of the strongest military presence among lower-tier realms, largely because they were almost invisible in low-tier supernatural conflicts. While these descriptions sounded like praise, they also revealed the true reputation the Aurora realm held in the wider universe. Though Aurora had long surpassed the level of a low-tier civilization and entered the higher ranges of mid-tier races, among true powers it was still not considered complete. This could not be helped. This foundation was lacking. Even so, it was already impressive that Aurora had achieved so much in less than 400 years. However, that same brilliance also made Aurora a thorn in the side of other civilizations. Of course, the ones bold enough to resent it were those of similar strength, most of whom were already enemies of Aurora. It was not that other civilizations were incapable of growing as fast. Rather, nearly all civilizations that developed at such a pace had already submitted themselves to a higher power. Aurora had not. That was what made it dangerous. If a race could reach this level in 400 years on its own, then given twice that time it would obviously grow far stronger, assuming its natives did not sabotage themselves. There was a trait shared by all strong races. Within their sphere of influence, civilizations of similar level could not coexist. It was brutal, but it was the law of the universe and the right of the strong. The civilizations close to Aurora understood this. Sooner or later, with the speed of its development, they would be swallowed by the tiny giant known as Aurora. If they could not stop it alone, then the only remaining option was to unite and suppress it together. At first, this had been nothing more than a temporary alliance. But the moment it became clear that Aurora could handle all of them while continuing to develop, the situation changed. For the sake of their own survival, it became a battle between civilizations. If there was one thing the Aurora Federation desired aside from expansion, it was stronger individuals and greater reputation. Selim's happiness was not without reason. In the wider universe, reputation carried weight almost as heavy as strength. It earned respect, and that respect opened doors brute force never could. Trade routes became easier to secure. Alliances came with fewer hidden conditions. Even hostile realms thought twice before acting recklessly. Aurora lacked deep foundations, but it compensated with momentum. What it needed most was recognition among established races. Proof that it could stand its ground. Michael's undead, fighting within the elven realm and holding their own, had done more than defend their master. Face had been gained. Though this event meant little to true higher powers, it was still significant. It showed that elven youths could not stand against an Aurora youth who was many times younger than them. That was why Selim was pleased. His thoughts drifted back to how it had all begun. At the time, the situation had been urgent. Michael's condition was unstable. Combined with his status as a holy child, the elves had offered their best. The healer assigned to Michael was not a wandering expert or a local elder. She was someone who resided within the Royal Elven Academy, an institution reserved for talented elves and noble bloodlines. That alone showed the level of treatment Michael had received, whether the elves admitted it or not. The academy itself was a city grown into the forest. Vast halls shaped from living trees stood beside stone platforms wrapped in vines. Bridges of woven roots connected towers where students trained, studied, and cultivated. Mana flowed freely through the grounds, guided by formation lines etched into bark and earth. It was a place where pride was nurtured as carefully as talent, and where most students had never tasted true defeat. That was where the problem began. Michael's arrival was not hidden. His treatment was not subtle. Whispers spread quickly through the academy. Curious youths, confident in their lineage and strength, wanted to know who the human was. Who this outsider was that required royal-level healing. They wanted to see him. At first, Selim could tell the elves treated the matter lightly. A holy child from a young realm sounded impressive, but Aurora was still new in their eyes. Titles meant little without proof. Many likely assumed Michael was more symbol than substance. Then they met his undead. Without Michael ever appearing, without him even waking, the academy students were stopped again and again. Attempts to approach were blocked. Probes were cut short. Pressure was met with greater pressure. Losses accumulated quietly. That was when the higher-ups began to pay attention. Pride did the rest. The elves did not withdraw. Instead, rewards were offered. Promises of recognition, resources, and advancement were placed before their best students. If one group failed, another was sent. Each time, they were beaten back by Michael's undead, who had also been given preparation and advantages of their own. Michael himself became impossible to ignore. His undead were his power, and that power had already embarrassed a royal academy. Still, the elves refused to believe they were beneath a holy child from another realm. They believed their own chosen youths could compete, if not surpass him. They were wrong, but elves were a prideful race. If they admitted inferiority, Selim would have thought something was wrong with them, or that their bloodlines had grown weak and brought shame to their ancestors. In any case, even if Michael's undead were to lose now, what had been done could not be undone. The old elf turned her gaze towards Selim, irritation flashing through her eyes. She could tell what he was thinking. She could also tell that he was enjoying it far too much. She said nothing. Instead, she shifted her attention to Michael. Her face remained calm and unreadable, as it always was, but her thoughts drifted back to the moment she had first laid hands on him, when he had been brought into the inner sanctuary and placed under her care. She remembered clearly how fragile his state had been. Chapter 769 Pride of a Realm 2. Edited. Refresh to clear errors. At first, she had not wanted to treat him. The reason was simple. She had thought he was a half-elf. She was one of the elves who despised diluted blood. She did not hide that belief in her heart. She had carried it for centuries, refined it over time until it felt like principle rather than prejudice. So when the report arrived and mentioned that the youth carried a faint sense of kinship, her first reaction upon seeing him was disgust. Then she learned he was not a half-elf. He was from a completely different race. That revelation surprised her even more. Still, since he was not a half-elf, she had no problem treating him. As she had been briefed, his soul was severely damaged. Normally, that would have been a difficult case even for her, but his foundation was strong. That strength was what kept him from collapsing entirely, and it was also why the injury was not beyond her ability to heal. At least, that was what she believed at the start. The longer she worked on Michael, the more her certainty wavered. What kind of monster was this? If she had not confirmed with her own senses that he had not truly ascended to become one with the universe, she would have believed she was dealing with someone at that level. His body was wrong. Not damaged wrong. Built wrong. It did not align with what a rank 2 should possess. His muscles, his bones, his circulation, even the way his organs carried energy all felt abnormal. Everything about him exceeded expectations in ways that made no sense. Worse, she could not see through him. Not properly. She was a rank 4. Her eyes had pierced countless secrets. She had treated nobles with hidden bloodlines, prodigies with sealed inheritances, and ancient monsters wearing the skin of youth. Yet every time she tried to look deeper into Michael, she encountered a wall. Not a barrier that resisted her. A wall that simply existed, as if the world itself had decided she was not permitted to see beyond it. That fact alone was enough to prove he was far from ordinary. It was also why, over the last 3 days, she had argued with the old man from Aurora again and again. She never claimed her elves were inferior to Michael. She also could not claim they were superior. At least, most of them were not. She would never admit that aloud, not even if her tongue rotted for it. But her eyes had seen enough. That was why, even now, as she looked at Michael standing there with his undead behind him, her expression remained calm while her thoughts refused to settle. Michael hesitated, then bowed slightly. "I apologize," he said, "if my undead's words were offensive." The old woman did not react. Her face remained smooth, her gaze steady. "It does not matter," she replied. She studied him briefly before speaking again. "How do you feel?" Michael blinked. He did not know who she was, but the fact that she stood beside the old man and the quiet pressure she carried made her status obvious. Still, he had no name to place her authority. "I am fine," Michael said. Selim's voice cut in calmly. "Do not hide anything," the old man said. "She is the one who treated you." Michael's eyes widened slightly. So that was it. He swallowed, then corrected himself. "I am better than before," he said honestly. "My body feels fine, but there is still a hollowness inside me. It feels like something is missing. It does not hurt, but it feels wrong." The old woman nodded, as if he had confirmed what she already knew. "That is your soul," she said. "You are out of danger now, but your soul is no longer what it was before the damage. The injury has been stabilized, not erased." Her gaze remained fixed on him. "That hollow feeling is the space the damage left behind." She continued, "It will not vanish in a single day." Selim frowned slightly. "That sounds like a hidden danger," he said. "Leaving something like that unattended could become a problem later." The old woman shook her head. "From what I have observed, no," she replied calmly. "There is no immediate hidden danger." Michael released a breath he had not realized he was holding. "But," she continued, her tone unchanged, "returning to your previous state will not be easy." She looked at him directly. "The soul is not like the body. It does not mend simply because time passes. Growth must occur naturally. Forcing it will only slow the process." Michael listened closely. For now, the old woman said, you should avoid anything that involves forming, deepening, or forcing connections with your soul. Michael frowned. Connections? He asked. Yes, she said. Skills, rituals, techniques, or methods that directly draw upon the soul. Anything that demands resonance, fusion, or refinement. She paused briefly. If you force such things while that hollow space still exists, you risk creating imbalance. At best, your recovery will stall. At worst, the damage may deepen. Michael nodded slowly. And if I do nothing? Then the hollow feeling will gradually fade, she replied. Once it does, your soul will be in a better state to grow again. Selim glanced at Michael. You heard her, he said. Do not rush. Michael clenched his fist lightly, then relaxed it. I understand, he said. The old woman gave a small nod. That is good, she said. Patience will be more valuable to you now than strength. She paused, then added, however, waiting is not your only option. Michael's eyes sharpened slightly. If you possess treasures that nourish the soul, she continued, you may use them to support recovery. Michael hesitated. What kind of treasures? He asked. Essences that strengthen the soul, the old woman replied. Soulgrass, spirit marrow, dream fruit, purified soul stones, or relics that carry stable soul intent. Even certain high-grade elixirs can help, if they are crafted properly. She glanced toward his chest, as if she could see the hollow place within him. If used carefully, such items may help the hollow feeling fade more quickly, she said. They may even bring you closer to the state you were in before the damage. Chapter 770 Troublesome Titans. Edited. All in all, Michael was currently safe from being crippled, but his previous solid foundation, though still ridiculously strong, had suffered a significant reduction compared to before. Though Michael felt saddened by the many losses he had suffered with seemingly no benefit to show for them, he was simply happy that it was over and had not ended in the worst way possible. Well, it was also not as if he had gained nothing. If not for this event, only heaven knew when he would finally have awakened a law seed, and whether it would even have been as unique as this one. At least among the many concepts he had previously possessed that could have become his law for ascension, the one he eventually comprehended was the perfect fit for him. Now having more undead didn't just benefit him in terms of numbers, but personally as well. After all, if others had one law, he could have as many as he could handle. Though his laws would not be as perfect as the originals, there were still many things he could achieve that others could not. Michael remained silent for a moment after the old woman finished speaking. Then he took a step back and bowed properly this time, deeper and more deliberate than before. Thank you, he said sincerely, for saving my life. The old woman waved a hand lightly, as if brushing aside something trivial. It was nothing, she replied. You were difficult, but not impossible. I have treated worse. Selim shot her a look, but she ignored him. She studied Michael again. Then her expression softened just a little. Since you are awake now, she said, why don't you take a look around? As she spoke, a faint smile appeared on her face. Selim noticed it immediately. His brows furrowed, and he turned his head slightly toward her. That smile, he said. What are you planning? The old woman did not answer him. Michael, however, thought nothing of it. I would like that, he said honestly. But first, I want to check on my undead. The old woman raised an eyebrow but did not object. That is reasonable, she said. Michael closed his eyes briefly. He reached out through his connection, calling for them. Most answered at once. Now that he knew what was going on with Spartan and Ghost, he was not worried. They could handle themselves. But there were two presences that did not respond. Michael's brow tightened. He reached out again, focusing. Nothing. The silence remained. Among all his undead, there were only two that concerned him now. His two Titan undead. They did not answer his call. They also gave off the feeling that they were sleeping. That was not normal. Michael opened his eyes slowly. His expression remained calm, but something cold settled behind it. He could not help but wonder if the elves had done something to his Undead. Michael exhaled slowly. I want to check on my undead, he said. The old woman inclined her head slightly. Then let's go together. Selim turned toward her at once but said nothing. Michael did not mind the company. He had no reason to refuse. He took a step forward, intending to start walking, but the old woman spoke again. There is no need for that, she said. Just show me where. Michael paused, then raised his arm and pointed in a direction. That way, he said. The old woman stepped closer and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. The world shifted. The ground beneath Michael's feet vanished for an instant, then returned just as suddenly. They were no longer near the inner sanctuary. They stood in a wide stretch of forest, deeper and denser than before. Massive trees rose around them, their trunks thick and ancient, roots weaving through the ground like living veins. The mana here was heavier, calmer, as if the land itself was breathing slowly. Selim appeared beside them a heartbeat later, his expression sharp, but controlled. Michael barely spared the surroundings a glance. His focus was already elsewhere. The feeling was stronger here. They're close, he said quietly. Ahead, between the trees, two enormous shapes loomed. His titans, sleeping. Michael's eyes narrowed. Selim took one look at the two towering figures and let out a low sound. Oh, he murmured. This undead. Michael raised an eyebrow at once. The old man's tone was too certain, too familiar, like he already knew what he was looking at. You know what's happening, Michael said. Selim did not deny it. He stepped forward a few paces, eyes tracing. The titans from the roots wrapped around their feet. Yes, a few things happened while you were asleep, he said calmly. Not often, but enough. Michael's gaze sharpened. Please tell me, he said. Why are they like this? Selim pointed at the first titan, the male one. This one is ascending, he said. He is stepping into the next realm. The process has already started, so he probably cannot respond to your call. He's in the stage where it's just him and the universe. This is the most vulnerable state he could ever be in. Michael's surprise hit instantly, then settled into something stranger. Beginning, ascending. His mind flashed back to the battle, to the moment beginning had devoured an existence above his current level, swallowing a rank for presence whole. Now, looking at the Titan's unmoving frame, it made sense. It was still shocking, but it was also expected to some extent. Michael's eyes shifted to the second Titan. Lily. And her? Michael asked quietly. Selim hesitated for a fraction of a second. The old woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the roots around Lily's legs, the way the forest seemed to cling to her like it was trying to restrain her. Selim finally spoke. She ate too much, he said. Michael stared. Selim's expression did not change, but his eyes did. The old woman's face remained calm, yet the air around her felt colder. Michael's expression turned strange. Beginning ascending was one thing. It was huge, but it followed a clear cause. He had devoured a being at that rank. Growth was the natural result. Lily was different. Lily could devour. It was her nature. It was her method of growth. But anything that could knock her out, anything that could push her into a state where even the bond felt thick and muffled, could not be ordinary. Michael looked from Lily to the two rank 4 figures beside him. He caught it then. A small shift in Selim's jaw. The faint tightening around the old woman's eyes. They were not treating this as a simple case of overeating. Michael's worry deepened. What did she eat? He asked, voice low. Neither of them answered immediately, and that silence told Michael everything he needed to know. The old woman inhaled slowly. Then she exhaled. And when she spoke, the calm she had worn until now cracked. My garden, she said flatly. Michael blinked. Your garden? Yes, she replied, turning toward him. Mine. Her voice was still measured, but there was an edge to it now, like something sharp being pressed under restraint. She slipped past. Then she helped herself. Selim looked away. Michael swallowed. She ate what, exactly? Michael asked. The old woman raised one finger. First, she said. She consumed heartwood nectar. Her finger lowered. Another rose. A distillate formed once every 50 years from elder trees that have survived spatial pressure. It reinforces the physical vessel, stabilizes flesh during ascension, and prevents collapse when the soul outpaces. The body. Her tone grew sharper. Most elves are permitted a single drop in their lifetime. A second finger. Then she found spirit-bind moss. Her eyes narrowed. A plant that strengthens soul-to-body cohesion. It is used to prevent soul drift during high-risk breakthroughs. Improper intake can cause saturation, forced dormancy, or spiritual swelling. A third finger. And then, she said, her voice rising, she ate dreamroot. Selim winced. Michael's heart skipped. Dreamroot, Michael repeated. Yes, the old woman snapped. A root that accumulates subconscious intent over centuries. It enhances comprehension, accelerates internal digestion of energy, and forces the mind into a deep sleep state where comprehension is advanced. Her voice was no longer calm. It was loud now. It is not food. The forest around them seemed to still. Michael slowly looked at Lily's massive, unmoving form. That explains the sleep, he said quietly. The old elf took a breath, visibly restraining herself. And that is not all, she added, more coldly now. She also absorbed residual essence from the soil essence that had been cultivated to nourish the garden itself. Michael's mouth opened, then closed. How much did she eat? He asked. The old woman stared at him. Then she said very calmly, very clearly, enough to have created a fight between me and your elder. Silence followed. Michael rubbed his face slowly. Beginning ascending made sense. Followed logic. Cause and effect. Devour a higher-ranked existence, trigger evolution. Lily was different. This was not evolution. This was excess. And excess in Lily's case was dangerous. He looked back at the old woman. Does your garden accept me washing plates? Chapter 771, Entering the Void. For a heartbeat, neither of the two rank 4s reacted. Then both of them looked at Michael. Really looked at him. The old woman's brows lifted first, surprise breaking through her composure. Selim turned his head slowly, as if he was not sure he had heard correctly. Wash plates, Selim repeated. Michael lowered his hand from his face and looked at them seriously. I mean it, he said. Michael was telling the truth. He had not even heard the rest of what Lily consumed, but it was obvious that there was no way he could pay it back. All she had taken was something that could hurt a rank 4 deeply. What could a rank 2 like him possibly achieve? For a moment, the forest was quiet. Then the old woman let out a short, incredulous laugh. It was brief, sharp, gone almost as soon as it appeared. Selim shook his head, a strange expression crossing his face. Amusement, disbelief, and something else layered beneath it. Young man, he said, do you have any idea what kind of plates you would be washing? Michael frowned slightly. What did the old woman mean by this? The old woman laughed again, this time longer. She gestured around them, at the forest, at the sleeping titan, at the roots glowing faintly beneath the soil. My garden is not a kitchen, she continued. The things she consumed are not meals that can be paid back with labor. Selim folded his arms. Even if you washed plates every day, he said calmly, even if you did nothing else for 1,000 years, it would not make a noticeable difference. Michael stiffened. 1,000 years? He repeated. Yes, the old woman said flatly. At least. She looked at him, then sighed, some of the heat draining from her voice. And that is assuming you lived that long. Michael fell silent. He looked at Lily again, at the way the forest cradled her massive form. Michael stared at Lily for a long moment, then turned back to the old woman. So, he said quietly, what can I do? The words were simple, direct. There was no bargaining tone in them, no attempt to dodge responsibility. The old woman looked at him, really looked at him this time. She did not answer immediately. Instead, she let out a slow breath and turned her gaze away, eyes drifting toward the canopy above. For a brief moment, her thoughts moved far from the forest. If he did not die early, the thought surfaced unbidden. If this human survived long enough, if fate did not crush him midway, then the future that awaited him was terrifying. Even to her, a rank 2 whose foundation already defied logic. A soul that the world itself refused to let her see through. Undead that could devour higher existences. Laws that did not belong to a single path, and so on. She could not even imagine how high he would climb, and that uncertainty unsettled her more than she liked to admit. It was not envy. Elves carried pride in their blood, but it was a racial pride, not the fragile sort that needed comparison. Strong individuals did not threaten her sense of self. But Michael was not merely strong. He was an unknown variable, one that did not fit into the long histories and predictions she trusted. A being like that could either become a pillar of an era or a calamity that reshaped it. She could use this opportunity to make him owe her a favor, but she would not say that out loud. So she turned back to him, her expression once again composed. The weight of those thoughts locked away behind calm eyes. "This is not something we will settle here," she said evenly. Michael frowned slightly. "Later." "Yes," she replied. "Later." Selim glanced at her, catching the shift in her tone, but he did not interrupt. The old woman turned back toward the sleeping titans and studied them one last time. "We will leave them here," she said calmly, "until they wake up on their own." Michael frowned. "Just like that?" "Yes," she replied. "Interfering now would do more harm than good. One is ascending, the other is digesting far more than she should have. Time is the safest answer for both." Michael understood that much. The old elf glanced at him, a faint curve touching her lips. "We should go and check the area." Michael hesitated. By now, he was certain there was a reason she kept saying this. The smile earlier. But he did not refuse. "All right," he said simply. Selim gave him a brief look but said nothing. The old woman stepped closer again and placed a hand lightly on Michael's shoulder, just as she had before. "Do not resist," she said. The world folded. The forest vanished in a soft distortion of space, and when Michael's feet touched solid ground again, the air felt different. They stood at the edge of the forest, where towering trees thinned and gave way to wide terraces of greenery. Michael's breath caught as he gazed at the buildings in front of him. This was the first time he had seen the realm he had arrived in. The old woman let Michael stare for a moment, then spoke in a calm, almost formal tone. "Welcome to the Royal Academy," she said. "The Academy for Gifted Elves." Michael looked at her. "An academy?" "Yes," she replied. "A place where talent is shaped into something useful. Leaders, guardians, healers, scholars, and those who will carry our realm's name without shame." Selim snorted quietly at the side, but he did not disagree. The old woman continued, her voice steady. "It exists for 3 purposes," she said. "To train the best, to keep the best under watch, and to make sure the best do not grow wild." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly at that last part, but he said nothing. He turned back to the view. It was strange. The whole place looked modern, even to him, but not in the way Aurora was modern. There were no steel towers or hard lines, no harsh corners, no streets of concrete. Instead, everything was organized with a kind of clean logic. Wide paths curved through the terraces like planned roads. Bridges connected platforms at perfect angles, but they were made of pale wood and braided vines, smooth underfoot like polished stone. Tall structures rose from living trunks, layered like buildings, with open balconies and shaded walkways. The place felt designed, not random. Even the air felt managed. It was nature, but controlled. Nature shaped into a city. Michael watched elves move through the academy grounds. Some carried stacks of tablets and books. Some walked in groups, talking quietly. It reminded him of a military base. Only this one had trees instead of walls. Michael breathed in slowly. "It's beautiful," he admitted. "Of course it is," the old woman replied, as if the answer was obvious. If we are going to shape people, we will not do it in ugliness. Michael's gaze stayed forward, but his mind kept turning. Michael let the view settle into his bones for a few breaths. Then he tilted his head up. The sky above the academy was not a clean, single color. It was layered, painted with slow-moving hues that twisted and overlapped like oil on water. Green bled into blue. Gold bled into violet. Farther, up, thin streaks of red and white flashed, then faded. Even from here it felt like pressure, like something was scraping the surface of the world. Michael narrowed his eyes. He could not see the fighters, but he could see the result of the fight. He turned toward Selim. "Is that my undead?" he asked. "The ones fighting right now." Selim followed his gaze to the sky and smiled faintly, as if he found the question amusing. "Yes," he said. Michael stared at the shifting colors again, jaw tight. "They're fighting in the surface level of the void," he said quietly. "Close enough that it can still touch reality." Selim glanced at him, then nodded once. "You're not blind," he said. Michael did not respond to the praise. His eyes stayed upward. A small part of him wanted to move, not because he thought Spartan needed him, but because the idea of his undead clashing in another realm's territory made his skin crawl. Selim's smile grew a little. "Do you want to go there?" he asked. Michael looked back at him. "Can I? With my prowess, I can see what is happening even without being there," Selim said, tone casual. "You cannot." Michael's expression did not change, but he understood. He had only just started to comprehend a law. He had only just stepped onto the first real edge of that path. Some things were still foreign to him. Selim continued, as if answering the rest of the question before. Michael asked it. "But breathing in the void is possible for you," he said. "You have that much foundation. You will not die just because you stepped out there." Michael held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the sky. Chapter 772 changes. Meanwhile, a few minutes ago, just as Michael saw his two titans, in another realm, another Michael was looking around in confusion. He stood inside a spacious chamber built from pale stone and dark wood. The ceiling rose high, but not overwhelmingly so, supported by sturdy beams carved with simple patterns of leaves and geometric lines. Small glass lamps hung from iron hooks, their steady light filling the room with a warm glow rather than brilliance. The floor beneath his boots was smooth stone, worn slightly at the edges from years of careful use. A large woven rug covered the center of the room, its patterns muted but tasteful, dyed in deep greens and browns. It softened his steps and dulled the echo of movement. Along the walls stood tall shelves made from polished oak, filled with neatly arranged books, scroll cases, and sealed containers. Everything was orderly. Nothing felt wasted or excessive. Whoever owned this place valued function as much as comfort. This was a guest room in the Evermoon mansion. "I didn't expect it to be possible to disconnect from this body without it rejecting me," Michael said, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Well, it did make sense when he thought about it. Aside from their synchronization in strength, one thing both bodies could feel was their soul, as they shared the same one. How that worked was still far beyond what the current Michael could understand through any textbook explanation, but it was simply how things were. And there had been multiple instances that proved this. The most recent was when even his body in the land of origin had entered a so-called log-out state, only resuming activity once he himself regained consciousness. Another example was when he had made the mistake of evolving his spear inside his soul space using soul energy instead of external mana. That had left him so exhausted that not only did the body in the land of origin fall unconscious, but Michael's ordinary body followed as well. However, none of these were his current concern. He had been unconscious for a total of 3 days. During that time, a great deal had happened. At present, Michael could sense several powerful guards stationed outside his room. However, before stepping out to understand the situation, he wanted to examine the changes that had occurred to him first. Status. Name: Michael Norman. Rank: 2, max. Level: 50. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Gift. Mark of origin. Title. First in history outlier. Class. Master Necromancer. Attributes. Strength. 892.75. Agility. 932.71. Constitution. 1140.92. Intelligence. 955.92. Compared to 6 months ago when Michael had only just become a supernatural, the difference between his past and present status was like the gap between realms. Back then, his attributes had barely scraped past single digits. Strength, agility, constitution, intelligence. Each one had been so low that even modest growth felt significant. Now, every value sat comfortably in the 3-digit range, with one already surpassing 4. And it would not stop there. As he continued to grow, it was only a matter of time before all of them fully entered 4 digits. In fact, Michael knew something else. If he were still human, truly human, then his current attributes would already place him firmly within the 4-digit range. A normal human with numbers like these would likely be considered a powerful rank 3 existence. But Michael was no longer human. He was something higher, and that difference mattered. Despite his overwhelming attributes, he was still only a rank 2 supernatural. That alone said more than any number ever could. The gap between races was not subtle. It was brutal. That also explained why Michael's attributes had not condensed or readjusted downward when he evolved into a true human. The answer was simple. High human was the peak of the human race. Michael only came to understand this later. True human was not a new race at all. It was a title, a recognition that he had pushed the limits of what a human could be, and stepped beyond them. The title did not replace his race. It reinforced it. It strengthened it. It elevated everything he already possessed instead of compressing it into something smaller. However, Michael knew that his current attributes were not this high simply because he had evolved into a true human. That was only part of it. The greater reason lay elsewhere. It was because of the law he had comprehended. When one awakened a law seed, they did not immediately ascend to rank 3. Ascension was not instantaneous. But once a law seed formed, as long as it was compatible with the individual and nothing went wrong, ascension became almost inevitable. Even if one did nothing but slowly comprehend their law over time, the path forward was already set. Michael understood this well. His law seed was not only awakened, it had been formed through deep comprehension rather than shallow insight. Because of that, he was already far ahead on the path toward completing it. Halfway, at least. Normally, reaching this stage would take decades, for some even longer. But Michael's comprehension had not been gradual. It had been forced under extreme circumstances, driven forward by a situation so abnormal that it defied common understanding. Whether that pace would continue remained unclear. The moment he comprehended his law had been unique. There was no guarantee that the same acceleration would ever happen again. Still, even without completing his law seed, without receiving the formal blessing of the universe that came with ascension, merely possessing it had already strengthened him. That was why his attributes were so high. A law seed was not passive. It refined the body, stabilized the soul, aligned existence itself toward higher state. In any case, thanks to already having a law seed, Michael only needed time before he eventually ascended to rank 3. However, all of this was only the good news. After that, his attention shifted to the bad. The sections of his status panel that revealed the condition of his soul. His contract slots. Thanks to his evolution into a true human, Michael's contract slots had once reached 1,500. With the awakening and deepening of his law seed, approaching 2,000 would not have been strange. At the very least, there should have been some form of growth. Now, the current Michael was staring at a number far lower than expected. A mere 1,035 slots, and roughly 20% of them were already filled. January 6th. Chapter 773, The Void. Edited. Back at the Elven Realm, Michael did not deny the old man. What the old man did not know was that Michael was already capable of remaining within the void thanks to his mortal god physique. He simply could not enter it directly yet. With his current level of law completeness, Michael could already begin learning how to step into the void and make use of certain spatial abilities. However, he had only just comprehended his law and had only recently awakened. He still needed time to properly understand and stabilize it before attempting anything reckless that could easily get him killed. Selim studied the sky for a moment longer before speaking again. "Do you know how many layers the void has?" he asked suddenly. Michael did not look away from the shifting colors overhead. "Yes," he replied calmly. 3. "The first layer is the surface level," Michael said. "It is separated from the material realm, but it still exists within it. A boundary layer, close enough that actions there can still influence reality." He lifted his gaze slightly. "That is where my undead are fighting now." Selim's eyes narrowed with interest. "The second layer," Michael continued, "is where one truly steps outside the material realm but has not yet entered the void itself. It is a transitional space. You are no longer bound by physical laws, but you are not completely free of them either." The old woman spoke. "And the third?" Michael's voice lowered slightly. "The true void," he said, "where one is completely outside the material realm. A place where distance loses meaning, where one can travel across the universe itself." Selim gave a short nod. "Good," he said. "You are learned." Michael showed little reaction to the praise. The old woman's lips curved faintly in mild approval. "It seems education in your realm is standard," she said calmly. "At least when it comes to basic theory." Selim's head turned sharply toward her. "Standard?" he repeated, the word carrying a hint of offense. "If the children of your realm can learn this as standard knowledge, then why can't my own?" The old woman did not respond. She did not even glance at him. She merely adjusted the fall of her sleeve, as if the conversation had ended the moment it began. Selim clicked his tongue softly under his breath. Then, as if recalling something important, his gaze returned to the sky and the strange colors layered across it. "Since you understand the 3 layers," he said, "let me ask you this. Do you know that the first layer can be manipulated by others?" Michael's head snapped toward him. "What?" he asked, genuinely startled. The idea struck him as wrong. The surface layer was close to the material realm, yes, but it was still the void. A place where laws were distorted, where ordinary influence should not reach so easily. "How?" Michael asked, brows drawing together. "The surface layer is separated. It should not be that easy to interfere with." Selim watched him for a moment, as if weighing his reaction. Then he nodded slowly. "Seeing as you had to ask me to confirm where your undead were fighting," Selim said, "it means there is a problem with communication." Michael stiffened slightly. Selim continued calmly, as if stating something obvious. "And that is understandable," he added, "because you are standing inside a place where the surface layer is controlled." Michael's eyes widened. "Controlled?" he repeated. His gaze swept across the academy again. Felt different now. Selim's lips curved faintly. "Do not worry. It is simply advanced application. It can be used to prevent interference, to protect, or to provide additional space." Michael swallowed. The sky above no longer felt like a distant phenomenon. Felt like a ceiling. The old woman's expression did not change, but her eyes gleamed faintly, as if she was pleased that the information had been spoken aloud. She had wanted him to know. As for Selim making it sound simple, she believed the young man was intelligent enough to understand that nothing about this was truly simple. If he misunderstood it now, that was not a bad thing. When the truth was eventually revealed to him, he would come to admire her race even more. For a race who tried so hard to present themselves as benevolent and refined, elves could be remarkably vain. Michael looked at her, then back to Selim. "So my undead," he said slowly. "If they are fighting near this place, the signal could be distorted because it is not allowed." Selim nodded once. "More accurately," he said, "it is not permitted. I could explain it to you," he added. Then he shook his head. "But it will be faster to show you." Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "Show me?" Selim stepped closer. Before Michael could react, the old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not resist," Selim said, echoing the old woman's earlier words. Michael felt space twist. The academy, the terraces, the sky, all of it vanished in an instant. The next moment, Michael's feet touched solid ground again. For a brief instant, his vision blurred, then everything snapped into focus. The first thing he noticed was the sky. It was no longer filled with shifting colors. It was gray, not the natural gray of clouds, but a flat, heavy gray, like ash spread endlessly across the world, pressed down on everything, dulling the horizon and draining depth from the distance. Michael looked around. Trees rose nearby, but they were gray as well. Their trunks, branches, and leaves all looked washed out, as if color had been stripped away. The grass beneath his feet was no different, pale and lifeless, bending softly in a wind that carried no scent. Michael's brow furrowed. He stopped, because it was not only the landscape. Elves were everywhere. They stood in clusters across the gray field, some on the ground, others hovering above in the air, their robes and armor muted by the strange light. Their attention was fixed upward, faces tilted toward the sky as if watching a ceremony. Michael followed their gaze, and his eyes narrowed. Above them, two figures were fighting. Chapter 774 Michael versus Royal Princess 1. Michael noticed that although he could see the elves clearly, they could not see him at all. At first, he felt a flicker of confusion, but it did not take long for him to piece things together. This had to be the work of one of the two rank 4 beings beside him. Whether it was a concealment technique, a passive field, or simply their presence suppressing perception, Michael could not tell. What mattered was that whoever was responsible clearly had no intention of being noticed. In any case, the situation worked perfectly in Michael's favor. He remained still, his presence quiet, while his gaze stayed fixed on the figures hovering in the air ahead. One of them was his undead Spartan. The other was a male elf. Most elves Michael had seen or read about possessed either blonde or silver hair. Blonde was considered the most common, often associated with ordinary elven bloodlines. Silver hair, on the other hand, carried a deeper meaning. According to what Michael knew, elves with silver hair usually belonged to noble families or, at the very least, carried traces of noble blood within their lineage. If an elf did not come from a well-known family yet possessed silver hair, it meant that somewhere in their ancestry, there had been a connection to nobility. Elven bloodlines were persistent like that. Time could blur names and status, but certain traits remained. As for why hair color mattered so much to elves in the first place, Michael recalled reading about it in an historical record back at the Academy Library. Long ago, elves had all shared the same blonde hair. However, a group of influential elites had grown dissatisfied with being indistinguishable from the rest. Through rituals, bloodline, refinement, and deliberate alteration, they changed their appearance to mark themselves as different. Silver hair was the result. It was not hard to understand why it caught on. The color carried an undeniable charm, enhancing the elves' natural beauty and elegance, traits they already valued deeply. That was why seeing an elf with blue hair immediately stood out. Hair colors outside of blonde and silver were extremely rare among elves. The elf in question appeared quite young at first glance, but Michael knew better. Given the lifespan of elves, their physical appearance often lagged far behind their actual age. In reality, this elf was likely far older than he seemed. Despite that, his presence was clear and sharp. Like Spartan, he was a rank 3 supernatural. Michael kept watching. After observing for a bit longer, Michael began to notice patterns. The blue-haired elf moved with a calm precision that immediately set him apart. Flames followed his every action, but they were not wild or uncontrolled. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. This was fire, but it was not simple fire. He could feel the law at work even without actively focusing on it. The moment the elf's power flared red, the heat intensified sharply. The air itself warped. Even at this distance, Michael could sense how oppressive it was. That part, at least, was familiar. Most fire-related laws manifested overwhelming heat as their primary trait. But then the color shifted. The red flames dulled, fading into a deep orange, then briefly into something closer to gold. The heat vanished almost instantly, replaced by something else entirely. The flames did not burn. They weighed down the space instead, becoming heavy and slow, as if gravity itself had thickened around them. Michael inhaled quietly. Still fire, he realized, but not heat. A moment later, the flames shifted again. Blue fire erupted, cold enough that frost crept across the void around it. Where the blue flames passed, space stiffened, movement slowed, and even Spartan's momentum dulled slightly. Michael's focus sharpened. So that's how it works. It was one law, yet it felt like many. Each color carried a different primary characteristic, yet all of them were undeniably fire at their core. Heat, weight, suppression, cold. Different expressions of the same origin. Michael found it fascinating. He did not know the exact concept behind the law, but he could sense that it was not a simple elemental path. It was closer to interpretation than raw power. The elf was not commanding fire to behave differently. He was redefining what fire meant within the bounds of his law. When the flames returned to red, the temperature spiked again. The void shimmered violently, pressure rippling outward as Spartan met the attack head-on. Unfortunately, though the elf law was strong, it still lost to Spartan more domineering black devouring flames. The outcome became clear soon after. The blue flames flared one last time, cycling rapidly through their hues as the elf pushed his law to its limit. The void trembled under the strain, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Spartan did not retreat. His black flames surged forward in a single, overwhelming tide. They did not change color. They did not shift form. They simply consumed. Where the two laws collided, there was no explosion. No violent backlash. The blue flames were swallowed whole, erased as if they had never existed. The space they occupied collapsed inward for a brief instant before stabilizing again. The elf froze. His eyes widened slightly as he felt the outcome through his law. Before his senses could fully register it, he pulled back immediately, flames retracting into his body as he created distance between them. Spartan did not pursue. He hovered in place, black fire rolling lazily around his form, his presence steady and absolute. There was no aggression in his posture now. The battle had already ended. A quiet spread through the gray field below. The watching elves exhaled almost in unison, tension draining from their bodies. Some lowered their heads. Others straightened, expressions filled with restrained awe rather than fear. The blue-haired elf steadied himself in the air. He studied Spartan for a long moment, then slowly inclined his head in acknowledgement. There was no bitterness on his face, only clarity. The difference between them was obvious. Spartan responded in kind, dipping his head just enough to return the gesture. Then the black flames around him faded, retreating into his form until only faint embers remained. Michael shook his head. The fight had ended faster. Below them, movement resumed. "That's another one," an elf whispered, voice low but sharp with disbelief. "What is it now, the fifth?" "Sixth," another corrected quietly. 6 confirmed losses today alone. And this one wasn't weak. A third scoffed. "Weak? He's one of the Academy's best law wielders." "And still lost," someone muttered. Their gazes drifted back toward Spartan, who still hovered calmly in the air, unmoving, as if the fight had never required effort in the first place. "That undead keeps getting stronger," an elf said through clenched teeth. "With it seemingly having more battles, it seems to comprehend a way to gain more strength." A brief silence followed. Then someone leaned closer and whispered, "You're forgetting one." A few heads turned. The elf gestured subtly toward the far edge of the gray field. There, standing alone, was a bulky figure. He did not float. He did not radiate law fluctuations or elemental distortion. He simply stood there, feet planted, arms relaxed at his sides, as if he were waiting for someone to approach. Ghost. Unlike Spartan, Ghost drew no immediate attention. There were no flames, no pressure, no obvious presence. Yet the space around him felt oddly firm, as if something invisible resisted approach. "He's still there," one elf said quietly. "He's been standing there since the trials started," another replied. "Has anyone challenged him yet?" A short laugh followed. "Aside from those few who focus purely on physical strength, no one sane would. His strength doesn't make sense," a different elf muttered. "And yet," the first elf said, lowering his voice further, "everyone who tried ended up broken." A ripple of unease passed through the group. A broader elf stepped forward slightly, his arms crossed over a frame, packed with dense muscle. His presence was heavier than most. "I fought this one," he said bluntly. Several elves turned to look at him. "Well?" someone asked. The physical elf's jaw tightened. "I couldn't move him. Not once. Every strike landed, but it felt like hitting something that didn't care. No recoil. No damage. Just resistance." He shook his head slowly. "That undead isn't strong the way we understand strength," he continued. "And that's the problem. It doesn't make sense." A ripple of unease passed through the group. High above, Michael listened in silence. His gaze shifted briefly toward Ghost, standing alone in the distance, then back to Spartan, who remained calm and steady in the air. So that's how they see it, Michael thought. His undead truly weren't normal when he thought about it again. What Michael did not know was that the other teachers of the Elven Academy also shared the same thought. Some of those students were even more powerful than them. So if they went up against them, they'd only fail more. And unlike the students, they had access to more information.